Chapter 40 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 40. Let him who will burn beneath these smouldering fires. Brantôme. Open the window, daughter. Those panes are very dirty, and I would fain see the day.
See the day, father. It will soon be night.
The sun still lies on the hills along the fjord. I long to breathe the free air through my prison bars. The sky is so clear.
Father, a storm is at hand.
A storm, Ethel? Where do you see it?
It is because the sky is clear, father, that I foresee a storm.
The old man looked at his daughter in surprise. Had I reasoned thus in my youth, I should not be here. Then he added in a firmer tone, What you say is correct, but it is not a common inference for one of your age. I do not understand why your youthful reasoning should be so like my aged experience. Ethel's eyes fell, as if she were troubled by this serious and simple remark. She clasped her hands sadly, and a deep sigh heaved her breast. Daughter, said the aged prisoner, for some days you have looked pale, as if life had never warmed the blood in your veins. For several mornings you have approached me with red and swollen lids, with eyes that have wept and watched. I have passed several days in silence, Ethel, with no effort on your part to rouse me from my gloomy meditations on the past. You sit beside me more melancholy even than myself. And yet you are not, like your father, weighed down by the burden of a whole lifetime of empty inaction. Morning clouds vanish quickly. You are at that period of existence when you can choose in dreams a future independent of the present, be it what it may. What troubles you, my daughter? Thanks to your constant captivity, you are sheltered from all sudden calamity. What error have you committed? I cannot think that you are grieving for me. You must by this time be accustomed to my incurable misfortunes. Hope, to be sure, can no longer be the subject of my discourse, but that is no reason why I should read despair in your eyes.
As he spoke these words, the prisoner's stern voice melted with paternal love. Ethel stood silently before him. All at once she turned away with an almost convulsive motion, fell upon her knees on the stone floor, and hid her face in her hands, as if to stifle the tears and sobs which burst from her. Too much woe filled full the wretched girl's heart. What had she done to that fatal stranger, that she should reveal to her the secret that was eating away her very life? Alas, since she had known her Ordener's true name, the poor child had not closed her eyes, nor had her soul known rest. Night brought her no alleviation, save that then she could weep freely and unseen. All was over. He was not hers. He who was hers by all her memories, by all her pangs, by all her prayers, he whose wife she had held herself to be upon the faith of her dreams. For the evening when Ordener had clasped her so tenderly in his arms was no more than a dream to her now. And in truth that sweet dream had been repeated nightly in her sleep. Was it a guilty love, which she still cherished for that absent friend, struggle against it as she might? Her Ordener was betrothed to another, and who can tell what that virginal heart endured when the strange and unknown sentiment of jealousy found entrance there like a poisonous viper? When she tossed for long sleepless hours upon her fevered bed, picturing her Ordener, perhaps even then, in the arms of another, fairer, richer, nobler than herself. For, thought she, I was mad indeed to suppose that he would brave death for me. Ordener is the son of a viceroy, of a great lord, and I am nothing but a poor prisoner. Nothing but the daughter of a proscribed and exiled man. He has left me, for he is free, and left me, no doubt, to wed his lovely betrothed, the daughter of a chancellor, a minister, a haughty count. Has my Ordener deceived me, then? O God! Who would have thought that such a voice was capable of deceit? And the wretched Ethel wept and wept again, and saw her Ordener before her, the man whom she had made the unwitting divinity of her whole being. That Ordener, adorned with all the splendor of his rank, advancing to the altar amid festal preparations, and gazing upon her rival with the smile that had once been her delight.
However, in spite of her unspeakable agony, she never for an instant forgot her filial affection. The weak girl made the most heroic efforts to conceal her distress from her unfortunate father. For there is nothing more painful than to repress all outward signs of grief, and tears unshed are far more bitter than those that flow. Several days had passed before the silent old man observed the change in his Ethel, and at his affectionate questions her long repressed grief had at last burst forth. For some time he watched her emotion with a bitter smile and a shake of the head, but at last he said, "Ethel, you do not live among men. Why do you weep?" He had scarcely finished these words when the sweet and noble girl rose. By a great effort she checked her tears, and dried her eyes with her scarf, saying, "Father, forgive me. It was a momentary weakness." And she looked at him with an attempt to smile. She went to the back of the room, found the Edda, seated herself by her taciturn father, and opened the book at random. Then, mastering her voice, she began to read. But her useless task was unheeded by her and by the old man, who waved his hand. "Enough, enough, my daughter." She closed her book. "Ethel," added Schumacker, "do you ever think of Ordener?" The young girl started in confusion. "Yes," he continued, "of that Ordener who went—" "Father," interrupted Ethel, "why should we trouble ourselves about him? I think as you do, that he left us, never to return." "Never to return, my daughter? I cannot have said such a thing. On the contrary, I have a strange presentiment that he will come back." "That was not your opinion, father, when you spoke so distrustingly of the young man." "Did I speak distrustfully of him?" "Yes, father, and I agree with you. I think that he deceived us." "That he deceived us, daughter? If I judged him thus, I acted like most men who condemn without proof. I have received nothing but professions of devotion from this Ordener." "And how do you know, father, that those cordial words did not hide treacherous thoughts?" "Usually, men disregard misfortune and disgrace. If this Ordener were not attached to me, he would not have visited my prison without a purpose." "Are you sure," replied Ethel feebly, "that he had no purpose in coming here?" "What could it be?" eagerly asked the old man. Ethel was silent. It was too great an effort for her to continue to accuse her beloved Ordener, whom she had formerly defended against her father. "I am no longer Count Griffenfeld," he resumed. "I am no longer Lord Chancellor of Denmark and Norway, the favored dispenser of royal bounty, the all-powerful minister. I am a miserable prisoner of state, a proscribed man, to be shunned like one stricken with the plague. It shows courage even to mention my name without execration to the man whom I overwhelmed with honors and wealth. It shows devotion for a man to cross the threshold of this dungeon unless he be a jailer or an executioner. It shows heroism, my girl, for a man to cross it and call himself my friend. No, I will not be ungrateful like the rest of humanity. That young man merits my gratitude, were it only for letting me see a kindly face and hear a consoling voice." Ethel listened in agony to these words, which would have charmed her a few days earlier, when this Ordener was still cherished as her Ordener. The old man, after a brief pause, resumed in a solemn tone. "Listen to me, my daughter, for what I have to say to you is serious. I feel that I am fading slowly. My life is ebbing. Yes, daughter, my end is at hand." Ethel interrupted him with a stifled groan. "Oh, godfather, say not so! Oh, for mercy's sake, spare your poor daughter! Alas, would you forsake me? What would become of me, alone in the world, if I were deprived of your protection?" "The protection of a proscribed man," said her father, shaking his head. "However, that is the very thing of which I have been thinking. Yes, your future happiness occupies me even more than my past misfortunes. Hear me, therefore, and do not interrupt me again. This Ordener does not deserve that you should judge him so severely, my daughter, and I had not hitherto thought that you felt such dislike to him. His appearance is frank and noble, which proves nothing truly, but I must say that he does not strike me as without merit. although it is enough that he has a human soul, for it to contain the seeds of every vice and every crime. There is no flame without smoke." The old man again paused, and fixing his eyes upon his daughter, added, "Warned from within of approaching death, I have pondered much, Ethel, and if he return, as I hope he may, I shall make him your protector and husband." Ethel trembled and turned pale. At the very moment when her dream of happiness had fled forever, her father strove to realize it. The bitter reflection, "I might have been happy," revived all the violence of her despair. For some moments she was unable to speak, lest the burning tears which filled her eyes should flow afresh. Her father waited for her answer. "What," she said at last in a faint voice, "would you have chosen him for my husband, father, without knowing his birth, his family, his name?" "I not only chose him, my daughter, I choose him still." The old man's tone was almost imperious. Ethel sighed. "I choose him for you, I say, and what is his birth to me? I do not care to know his family, since I know him. Think of it. He is the only anchor of salvation left to you. Fortunately, I believe that he does not feel the same aversion for you which you show for him." The poor girl raised her eyes to heaven. "You hear me, Ethel. I repeat, what is his birth to me? He is doubtless of obscure rank, for those born in palaces are not taught to frequent prisons. Do not show such proud regret, my daughter. Do not forget that Ethel Schumacker is no longer Princess of Wollin and Countess of Tonsberg. You have fallen lower than the point from which your father rose by his own efforts. Consider yourself happy if this man accept your hand, be his family what it may. If he be of humble birth, so much the better, my daughter. At least your days will be sheltered from the storms which have tormented your father. Far from the envy and hatred of men, under some unknown name, you will lead a modest existence, very different from mine, for its end will be better than its beginning." Ethel fell on her knees. "Oh, father, have mercy!" He opened his arms to her in amazement. "What do you mean, my daughter?" "In heaven's name, do not describe a happiness which is not for me." "Ethel," sternly answered the old man, "do not risk your whole life. I refused the hand of a princess of the blood royal, a princess of Holstein Augustenburg. Do you hear that? And my pride was cruelly punished. You despise an obscure but loyal man. Tremble lest yours be as sadly chastised." "Would to heaven," sighed Ethel, "that he were an obscure and loyal man." The old man rose and paced the room in agitation. "My daughter," said he, "your poor father implores and commands you. Do not let me die uncertain as to your future. Promise me that you will accept this stranger as your husband." "I will obey you always, father, but do not hope that he will return." "I have weighed the probabilities, and I think from the tone in which Ordener uttered your name " "That he loves me?" bitterly interrupted Ethel. "Oh, no, do not believe it." The father answered coldly, "I do not know whether, to use your girlish expression, he loves you, but I know that he will return." "Give up that idea, father. Besides, you would not wish him for your son-in-law, if you knew who he is." "Ethel, he shall be my son-in-law, be his name and rank what they may." "Well," she replied, "how if this young man, whom you regard as your solace, whom you consider as your daughter's support, be the son of one of your mortal foes, of the Viceroy of Norway, Count Guldenlew?" Schumacker started back. "Heavens! What do you say? Ordener? That Ordener? It is impossible." The look of unutterable hatred which flashed from the old man's faded eyes froze Ethel's trembling heart, and she vainly repented the rash words which she had uttered. The blow was struck. For a few moments Schumacker stood motionless, with folded arms. His whole body quivered as if laid upon live coals. His flaming eyes started from their sockets, and his gaze, riveted to the pavement, seemed as if it would pierce the stones.
At last these words issued from his livid lips in a voice as faint as that of a man who dreams. Ordener. Yes, it must be so. Ordener Guldenlew. It is well. Come, Schumacher, old fool. Open your arms to him. The loyal youth has come to stab you to the heart. Suddenly he stamped upon the ground, and went on in tones of thunder. So they sent their whole infamous race to insult me in my disgrace and captivity. I have already seen a d'Ahlefeld. I almost smiled upon a Guldenlew. Monsters! Who would ever have thought that this Ordener possessed such a soul, and bore such a name? Wretched me, wretched he. Then he fell exhausted into his chair, and while his breast heaved with sighs, poor Ethel, trembling with fright, wept at his feet. Do not weep, my daughter, said he in gloomy tones. Come, oh, come to my heart. And he clasped her in his arms. Ethel knew not how to explain this caress at a moment of rage, but he resumed. At least, girl, you were more clear-sighted than your old father. You were not deceived by that serpent with gentle but venomous eyes. Come, let me thank you for the hatred which you have shown me that you feel for that contemptible Ordener. She shuddered at these praises, alas, so ill-deserved. Father, said she, be calm. Promise me, added Schumacher, that you will always retain the same feeling for the son of Guldenlew. Swear it. God forbids us to swear, father. Swear, swear, girl, vehemently repeated Schumacher. Will you always retain the same feeling for Ordener Guldenlew? Ethel had scarcely strength to falter. Always. The old man drew her to his heart. It is well, my daughter. Let me at least bequeath to you my hate, if I cannot leave you the wealth and honors of which I was robbed. Listen. They deprived your old father of rank and glory. They dragged him in irons to the gallows, as if to stain him with every infamy and make him endure every torment. Wretches! Oh, may heaven and hell hear me, and may they be cursed in this life, and cursed in their posterity. He was silent for a moment. Then, embracing his poor daughter, terrified by his curses, But Ethel, my only glory and my only treasure, tell me, how was your instinct so much more skillful than mine? How did you discover that this traitor bears one of the abhorred names inscribed upon my heart in Gaul? How did you penetrate his secret? She was summoning all her strength to answer when the door opened. A man dressed in black, carrying in his hand an ebony wand, and wearing about his neck a chain of unpolished steel, appeared upon the threshold, escorted by halberdiers also dressed in black. "What do you want?" asked the captive sharply and in astonishment. The man, without replying or looking at him, unrolled a long parchment, to which was fastened by silken threads a seal of green wax, and read aloud: "In the name of His Majesty, our most gracious sovereign and lord, Christian the King, Schumacher, prisoner of state in the royal fortress of Munkholm, and his daughter, are commanded to follow the bearer of the said command." Schumacher repeated his question. "What do you want?" The man in black, still immovable, prepared to reread the document. "That will do," said the old man. Then, rising, he signed to the surprised and startled Ethel to follow with him this dismal escort. End of chapter 40. Chapter 41 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 41. A doleful signal was given. An abject minister of justice knocked at his door, and informed him that he was wanted. Joseph de Maistre. Night had fallen. A cold wind whistled around the cursed tower, and the doors of Vigla ruin rattled on their hinges as if the same hand had shaken all of them at once. The wild inhabitants of the tower, the hangman and his family, had gathered about the fire lighted in the middle of the room on the first floor, which cast a fitful glow upon their dark faces and scarlet garments. The children's features were fierce as their father's laughter, and haggard as their mother's gaze. Their eyes, as well as those of Becky, were fixed on Orugix, who, seated on a wooden stool, seemed to be recovering his breath, his feet covered with dust, showing that he had but just returned from some distant trip. "Wife, listen, listen, children. I have not been gone 2 whole days merely to bring back bad news. If I am not made executioner to the king before another month is out, I wish I may never tie another slip noose or handle an axe again. Rejoice, my little wolf cubs. Your father may leave you the Copenhagen scaffold by way of an inheritance, after all."
"Nicol," asked Becky, "what has happened?"
"Ha! And you, my old gypsy," rejoined Nicol with his boisterous laugh, "rejoice too. You can buy any number of blue glass necklaces to adorn your long skinny neck. Our agreement will soon be up, but never fear. In a month, when you see me chief hangman of both kingdoms, you will not refuse to break another jug with me."
"What is it? What is it, father?"
asked the children, the older of whom was playing with a bloody rack, while the little one amused himself by plucking alive a young bird which he had stolen from the nest. "What is it, children? Kill that bird, Hesper. It makes as much noise as a rusty saw. And besides, you should never be cruel. Kill it." "What is it, you say? Nothing. A trifle, truly. Nothing, Dame Becky, save that within a week from this time, ex-Chancellor Schumacher, who is a prisoner at Munkholm, after looking me so closely in the face at Copenhagen, and the famous brigand of Iceland, Hans of Klipstadur, may perhaps both pass through my hands at once." The red woman's wandering eye assumed an expression of surprised curiosity.
"Schumacher, Hans of Iceland! How is that, Nicol?"
"I'll tell you all about it. Yesterday morning, on the road to Skongen, at Ordalsbridge, I met the whole regiment of musketeers from Munkholm marching back to Trondheim with a very victorious air. I questioned one of the soldiers, who condescended to answer, probably because he did not know why my jerkin and my cart were red. I learned that the musketeers were returning from Black Pillar Pass, where they had cut to pieces various bands of brigands, that is to say, insurgent miners. Now, you must know, Gypsy Becky, that these rebels revolted in Schumacher's name, and were commanded by Hans of Iceland. You must know that his uprising renders Hans of Iceland guilty of the crime of insurrection against royal authority, and Schumacher guilty of high treason, which will naturally lead those 2 honorable gentlemen to the scaffold or the block. Add to these 2 superb executions, which cannot fail to bring me in at least 15 gold ducats each, and to entitle me to the greatest honor in both kingdoms, several other though less important ones."
"But do tell me,"
interrupted Becky,
"has Hans of Iceland been captured?"
"Why do you interrupt your lord and master, miserable woman?" said the hangman. "Yes, to be sure, the famous, the impregnable Hans of Iceland is a prisoner, together with several other leaders of the brigands, his lieutenants, who will also bring me in 12 crowns apiece, to say nothing of the sale of their bodies. He was captured, I tell you, and I saw him, if you must know all the particulars, march by between a double file of soldiers." The woman and children crowded eagerly about Orugix.
"What? Did you really see him, father?"
asked the children. "Be quiet, boys. You shriek like a rogue protesting his innocence. I saw him. He is a giant. His hands were tied behind his back, and his forehead was bandaged. I suppose he was wounded in the head. But never fear, I will soon heal his hurt for him." Accompanying these brutal words with brutal gesture, the hangman added, "There were 4 of his comrades behind him, prisoners too and wounded, like him, who were being taken, like him, to Trondheim, where they are to be tried with ex-chancellor Schumacher by a court of justice presided over by the lord mayor and the present chancellor."
"Father, what did the other prisoners look like?"
The first 2 were a couple of old men, one of whom wore a miner's broad felt hat, and the other a mountaineer's cap. Both seemed utterly disheartened. Of the other 2, one was a young miner who marched along with head up, whistling. The other— Do you remember, Becky, those travelers who came to this tower some 10 days ago, on the night of that terrible storm?"
As Satan remembers the day of his fall, replied the woman. Did you notice a young man in company with that crazy old doctor with the big periwig? A young fellow, I say, who wore a great green cloak and a cap with a black feather. Yes, indeed. I can see him now saying, Woman, we have plenty of gold. Well, old woman, I hope I may never wring the neck of anything worse than a grouse if the fourth prisoner was not that young man. His face, to be sure, was entirely hidden by his feather, his cap, his hair, and his cloak. Besides, he hung his head. But it was the very same dress, the same boots, the same manner. I'll swallow the stone gallows at Skongen at a single mouthful, if it be not the same man. What do you say to that, Becky? Wouldn't it be a joke if, after I had given him something to sustain life, he should also receive from me something to cut it short, and should exercise my skill after having tasted my hospitality? The hangman's coarse laughter was loud and long. Then he resumed. Come, make merry, all of you, and let us drink. Yes, Becky, give me a glass of that beer which scrapes a man's throat as if he were drinking files, and let me drain it to my future advancement. Come, here's to the health and prosperity of Nicol Orugix, executioner royal that is to be. I will confess, you old sinner, that I found it hard work to go to Noah's village to hang a contemptible clown for stealing cabbage and chicory. Still, when I thought it over, I felt that 32 escalins were not to be sneezed at, and that my hands would not be degraded by turning off mere thieves and riffraff of that kind, until after they had actually beheaded the noble count and ex-chancellor, and the famous demon of Iceland. I therefore resigned myself, while waiting for my certificate as hangman to the king, to dispatch the poor wretch at Noah's village. And here, he added, drawing a leather purse from his wallet, are the 32 escalins for you, old girl. At this moment 3 blasts from a horn were heard outside. Woman, cried Orugix, those are the bowmen of the Lord Mayor. With these words he hurried downstairs. An instant later he reappeared, carrying a large parchment of which he had broken the seal. There, said he to his wife, there's what the Lord Mayor has sent me. Do you decipher it? For you can read Satan's scrawl. Perhaps it is my promotion already? For since the court is to have a chancellor to preside over it, and the chancellor as prisoner at the bar, it is only proper that the man who carries out the sentence should be an executioner royal. The woman took the parchment, and after studying it for some time, read aloud while the children stared at her in stupid wonder. In the name of the council of the province of Trondheim, Nicol Orugix, hangman for the province, is hereby ordered to repair at once to Trondheim, and to carry with him his best axe, block, and black hangings. Is that all? Asked the hangman in a dissatisfied tone. That is all, replied Becky. Hangman for the province, muttered Orugix. He cast an angry glance at the official document, but at last exclaimed, Well, I must obey and be off. After all, they tell me to bring my best axe and the black hangings. Take care, Becky, that you rub off the spots of rust which have dimmed my axe, and see that the hangings are not stained with blood. We must not be discouraged. Perhaps they mean to promote me in payment for this fine execution. So much the worse for the prisoners. They will not have the satisfaction of dying by the hand of an executioner royal. End of chapter 41. Chapter 42 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 42. Elvira. What has become of poor Sancho? He has not appeared in town. Nuno. Sancho has doubtless contrived to find shelter. Lope de Vega. The best alcalde is the king. Count d'Ahlefeld, dragging behind him an ample robe of black satin lined with ermine, his head and shoulders concealed by a large judicial wig, his breast covered with stars and decorations, among which were the collars of the royal orders of the Elephant and the Dannebrog, clad, in a word, in the complete costume of the Lord Chancellor of Denmark and Norway, paced with an anxious air up and down the apartment of Countess d'Ahlefeld, who was alone with him at the moment. "Come, it is 9 o'clock. The court is about to open. It must not be kept waiting, for sentence must be pronounced tonight, so that it may be carried out by tomorrow morning at latest. The mayor assures me that the hangman will be here before dawn. Elphega, did you order the boat to take me to Munkholm?"
"My lord, it has been waiting for you at least half an hour," replied the countess, rising from her seat.
"And is my litter at the door?"
"Yes, my lord."
"Good. So you say, Elphega," added the count, clapping his hand to his head, "that there is a love affair between Ordener Guldenlew and Schumacher's daughter?"
"A very serious one, I assure you," replied the countess with a smile of anger and contempt.
Who would ever have imagined it? And yet, I tell you that I suspected it."
"And so did I," said the countess. "This is a trick played upon us by that confounded Levin."
"Old scamp of a Mecklenburger,"
muttered the chancellor.
"Never fear. I'll recommend you to Arnstorff. If I could only succeed in disgracing him. Ah, see here, Elphega. I have an inspiration."
"What is it?"
"You know that the persons whom we are to try at Munkholm Castle are 6 in number. Schumacher, whom I hope I shall have no further cause to fear tomorrow at this hour. The colossal mountaineer, our false Hans of Iceland, who has sworn to sustain his character to the end, in the hope that Musdemon, from whom he has already received large sums of money, will help him to escape. That Musdemon really has the most devilish ideas. The other 4 prisoners are the 3 rebel chiefs, and a certain unknown character, who stumbled, no one knows how, into the midst of the assembly at Apsil Kor, and whom Musdemon's precautions have thrown into our hands. Musdemon thinks that the fellow is a spy of Levin de Knud. And indeed, when brought here a prisoner, his first words were to ask for the general. And when he learned of the Mecklenburger's absence, he seemed dumbfounded. Moreover, he has refused to answer any of Musdemon's questions."
"My dear lord," interrupted the countess, "why have you not questioned him yourself?"
"Really, Elphega, how could I, in the midst of all the business which has overwhelmed me since my arrival? I trusted the affair to Musdemon, whom it interests as much as it does me. Besides, my dear, the fellow is not of the slightest consequence in himself. He is merely some poor vagabond. We can only turn him to account by representing him to be an agent of Levin de Knud, and as he was captured in the rebel ranks, it would go to prove a guilty connivance between Schumacher and the Mecklenburger, which will suffice to bring about, if not the arraignment, at least the disgrace of that confounded Levin."
The countess meditated for a moment. "You are right, my lord. But how about this fatal passion of Baron Thorwick for Ethel Schumacher?" The chancellor again rubbed his head. Then, shrugging his shoulders, he said,
"See here, Elphega. Neither you nor I are young novices, and we ought to understand men. When Schumacher has been condemned for high treason for the 2nd time, when he has undergone an infamous death on the gallows, when his daughter, reduced to the lowest ranks of society, is forever publicly disgraced by her father's shame, do you suppose, Elphega, that Ordener Guldenlew will then recall for a single instant this childish flirtation, which you call passion, judging it by the extravagant talk of a crazy girl? Or that he will hesitate a single day between the dishonored daughter of a wretched criminal and the illustrious daughter of a great chancellor? We must judge others by ourselves. Where do you find that the human heart is so constituted?"
"I trust that you may be right.
But I think you will not disapprove of my request to the mayor that Schumacher's daughter might be present at her father's trial, and might be placed in the same gallery with me. I am curious to study the creature." "All that can throw light upon the affair is valuable," said the chancellor calmly. "But tell me, does anybody know where Ordener is at present?" "No one knows. He is the worthy pupil of that old Levin, a knight errant like him. I believe that he is visiting Wardhus just now." "Well, well, our Ulrica will settle him. But come, I forget that the court is waiting for me."
The countess detained the chancellor. "One word more, my lord. I asked you yesterday, but your mind was full of other things, and I could not get an answer. Where is my Frederick?"
"Frederick,"
said the count with a melancholy expression, and hiding his face with his hand. "Yes, answer me. My Frederick. His regiment has returned to Throndhjem without him. Swear to me that Frederick was not in that horrible affair at Black Pillar Pass. Why do you change color at his name? I am in mortal terror." The chancellor's features resumed their wonted composure.
"Make yourself easy, Alfiga. I swear that he was not at Black Pillar Pass. Besides, the list of officers killed or wounded in that skirmish has been published."
"Yes," said the countess, growing calmer. "You reassure me. Only 2 officers were killed, Captain Laurie and that young Baron Randmer, who played so many mad pranks with my poor Frederick at the Copenhagen balls. Oh, I have read and reread the list, I assure you. But tell me, my lord, did my boy remain at Waldstrom?"
"He did,"
replied the count. "Well, my friend," said the mother, with a smile which she tried to render affectionate, "I have but one favor to ask of you, that is, to recall Frederick as soon as may be from that frightful region." The chancellor broke from her suppliant arms, saying,
"Madam, the court waits. Farewell. What you ask does not depend on my will."
And he quitted the room abruptly. The countess was left in a sad and pensive mood.
"It does not depend upon his will," said she, "and he has but to utter a word to restore my son to my arms. I always thought that man was genuinely bad."
End of chapter 42. Chapter 43 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 43. Is it thus you treat a man in my position? Is it thus you forget the respect due to justice? Calderon, Louis Perez of Galicia. The trembling Ethel, separated from her father by the guards upon leaving the Lion of Schleswig tower, was conducted through dim passages, hitherto unknown to her, to a small dark cell, which was closed as soon as she had entered it. In the wall opposite the door was a large grated opening, through which came the light of links and torches. Before this opening was a bench, upon which sat a woman, veiled and dressed in black, who signed to her to be seated beside her. Ethel obeyed in silent dismay. She looked through the grated window, and saw a solemn and imposing scene. At the farther end of the room, hung with black and dimly lighted by copper lamps suspended from the vaulted roof, was a black platform in the shape of a horseshoe, occupied by 7 judges in black gowns, one of whom, placed in the center upon a higher seat, wore on his breast glittering diamond chains and gold medals. The judge on his right differed from the others in the wearing of a white girdle and an ermine mantle, showing him to be the lord mayor of the province. To the right of the bench was a platform covered with a dais, upon which sat an old man in bishop's dress. To the left, a table covered with papers, behind which stood a short man with a huge wig, and enveloped in a long black gown. Opposite the judges was a wooden bench, surrounded by halberdiers holding torches, whose light, reflected back from a forest of pikes, muskets, and partisans, shed a faint glimmer upon the tumultuous heads of a mob of spectators, crowded against the iron railing dividing them from the court-room. Ethel looked at this spectacle as she might have beheld some waking dream, yet she was far from feeling indifferent to what was about to happen.
A secret voice warned her to listen well, because a crisis in her life was at hand. Her heart was a prey to contending emotions. She longed to know instantly what interest she had in the scene before her, or never to know it at all. For some days the idea that her Ordener was forever lost to her had inspired her with a desperate desire to be done with existence once for all, and to read the book of her fate at a single glance. Therefore, realizing that this was a decisive hour, she watched the somber picture before her, not so much with aversion as with a sort of impatient, melancholy joy. She saw the president rise and proclaim in the king's name that the court was opened. She heard the short dark man to the left of the bench read, in a low rapid voice, a long discourse, in which her father's name, mixed with the words conspiracy, revolt in the mines, and high treason, frequently recurred. Then she remembered what the dread stranger had told her in the dungeon garden of the charges against her father, and she shuddered as she heard the man in the black robe conclude his speech with the word death, pronounced with great emphasis. She turned in terror to the veiled lady, from whom she shrank with unaccountable fear. " Where are we ? What does all this mean ?" she timidly asked. A gesture from her mysterious companion commanded her to be silent and attentive. She again turned her eyes to the court room. The venerable bishop rose, and Ethel caught these words: "In the name of omnipotent and most merciful God, I, Pamphilus Luther, bishop of the royal province and town of Trondhjem, do greet the worthy court assembled here in the name of the king, our lord, under God. And I say that, having observed that the prisoners brought to this bar are men and Christians, and that they have no counsel, I declare to the worthy judges that it is my purpose to aid them with my poor strength in the cruel position in which it has pleased Heaven to place them. Praying that God will deign to strengthen my great weakness and enlighten my great blindness, I, bishop of this royal diocese, greet this wise and worthy court." So saying, the bishop stepped from his episcopal throne and took his seat upon the prisoner's bench, amid a murmur of applause from the people. The president then rose and said in dry tones, "Halberdiers, command silence. My lord bishop, the court thanks your reverence in the name of the prisoners. Inhabitants of the province of Trondhjem, pay good heed to the king's justice. There can be no appeal from the sentence of the court. Bowman, bring in the prisoners." There was an expectant and terrified hush. The heads of the crowd swayed to and fro in the darkness like the waves of a stormy sea upon which the thunder is about to burst. Soon Ethel heard a dull sound and a strange stir below her in the gloomy aisles of the court. The audience moved aside with a thrill of impatient curiosity. There was a noise of many feet. Halberds and muskets gleamed, and 6 men, chained and surrounded by guards, entered the room bareheaded. Ethel had eyes for the first of the 6 alone, a white-headed old man in a black gown. It was her father. She leaned, almost fainting, against the stone balustrade in front of her. Everything swam before her in a confused cloud, and it seemed as if her heart were in her throat. She said in a feeble voice, "Oh God, help me!" The veiled woman bent over her and gave her salts to smell, which roused her from her lethargy. "Noble lady," said she, reviving, "for mercy's sake, speak but one word to convince me that I am not the sport of spirits from hell." The stranger, deaf to her entreaty, again turned her head toward the court, and poor Ethel, who had somewhat recovered her strength, resigned herself to do the same in silence. The president rose and said in slow, solemn tones, "Prisoners, you are brought before us that we may decide whether or not you are guilty of high treason, conspiracy, and armed rebellion against the authority of the king, our sovereign lord. Examine your consciences well, for the charge of lese majesty rests upon your heads." At this moment a gleam of light fell upon the face of one of the 6 prisoners, a young man who held his head down as if to veil his features with his long hair. Ethel started, and a cold sweat oozed from every pore. She thought she recognized, but no, it was a cruel illusion. The room was but dimly lighted, and men moved about it like shadows. The great polished ebony Christ hanging over the president's chair was scarcely visible.
And yet that young man was wrapped in a mantle which at this distance seemed to be green. His disordered hair was chestnut, and the unexpected gleam which revealed his features. But no, it was not true. It could not be. It was some horrid delusion. The prisoners were seated on the bench beside the bishop. Schumacker took his place at one end. He was separated from the chestnut-haired young man by his 4 companions in misfortune, who wore coarse clothes, and among whom was one of gigantic stature. The bishop sat at the other end of the bench. Ethel saw the president turn to her father, saying in a stern voice, "Old man, tell us your name and who you are." The old man raised his venerable head. "Once," he replied, looking steadily at the president, "I was Count Griffenfeld and Tönsberg, Prince of Wollin, Prince of the Holy German Empire, Knight of the Royal Orders of the Elephant and the Dannebrog, Knight of the Golden Fleece in Germany and of the Garter in England, Prime Minister, Lord Rector of all our universities, Lord High Chancellor of Denmark, and—" The president interrupted him. "Prisoner, the court does not ask who you were, nor what your name once was, but who you are and what it now is." "Well," answered the old man quickly, "my name is John Schumacker now. I am 69 years old, and I am nothing but your former benefactor, Chancellor d'Ahlefeld." The president seemed confused. "I recognized you, Count," added the ex-chancellor, "and as I thought you did not know me, I took the liberty to remind your grace that we are old acquaintances." "Schumacker," said the president in a voice trembling with concentrated fury, "do not trifle with the court." The aged prisoner again interrupted him. "We have changed places, noble chancellor. I used to call you d'Ahlefeld, and you addressed me as count." "Prisoner," replied the president, "you only injure your cause by recalling the infamous decree which already brands your name." "If that sentence entailed infamy on anyone, Count d'Ahlefeld, it was not on me." The old man half rose as he spoke these words with great emphasis. The president waved his hand. "Sit down. Do not insult, in the presence of the court, the judges who condemned you, and the king who surrendered you to those judges. Recollect that his majesty deigned to grant you your life, and confine yourself to defending it." Schumacker's only answer was a shrug of the shoulders. "Have you," asked the president, "anything to say in regard to the charges preferred against you?" Seeing that Schumacker was silent, the president repeated his question. "Are you speaking to me?" said the ex-chancellor. "I supposed, noble Count d'Ahlefeld, that you were speaking to yourself. Of what crime do you accuse me? Did I ever give a Judas kiss to a friend? Have I imprisoned, condemned, and dishonored a benefactor? Robbed him to whom I owed everything? In truth, my lord chancellor, I know not why I am brought here. Doubtless it is to judge of your skill in lopping off innocent heads. Indeed, I shall not be sorry to see whether you find it as easy to ruin me as to ruin the kingdom, and whether a single comma will be a sufficient pretext for my death, as one letter of the alphabet was enough for you to bring on a war with Sweden." He had scarcely uttered this bitter jest when the man seated at the table to the left of the bench arose. "My lord president," said he, bowing low, "my lord judges, I move that John Schumacker be forbidden to speak if he continue to insult his grace, the president of this worshipful court." The calm voice of the bishop answered, "Mr. Private Secretary, no prisoner can be deprived of the right to speak." "True, reverend bishop," hastily exclaimed the president. "We propose to allow the defense the utmost liberty. I would merely advise the prisoner to moderate his expressions if he understands his own interest." Schumacker shook his head and said coldly, "It seems that Count d'Ahlefeld is more sure of his game than he was in 1677. "Silence," said the president, and instantly addressing the prisoner next to the old man, He asked his name. A mountaineer of colossal stature, whose forehead was swathed in bandages, rose, saying,
I am Hans of Klipstadur, in Iceland.
A shudder of horror ran through the crowd, and Schumacker, lifting his head, which had sunk upon his breast, cast a sudden glance at his dreadful neighbor, from whom all his other fellow prisoners shrank.
Hans of Iceland,
asked the president when the confusion ceased,
what have you to say for yourself?
Ethel was as much startled as any of the spectators by the appearance of the famous brigand, who had so long played a prominent part in all her visions of alarm. She fixed her eyes with timid dread upon the monstrous giant, with whom her Ordener had possibly fought, whose victim he perhaps was. This idea again took possession of her soul in all its painful shapes. Thus, wholly absorbed by countless heart-rending emotions, she hardly heeded the coarse, blundering answer of this Hans of Iceland, whom she regarded almost as her Ordener's murderer. She only understood that the brigand declared himself to be the leader of the rebel forces.
Was it of your own free will,
asked the president,
or by the suggestion of others that you took command of the insurgents?
The brigand answered,
It was not of my own free will. Who persuaded you to commit such a crime? A man named Hackett. Who was this Hackett? An agent of Schumacker, whom he also called Count Griffenfeld.
The president turned to Schumacker.
Schumacker, do you know this Hackett?
You have forestalled me, Count d'Ahlefeld, rejoined the old man. I was about to ask you the same question.
John Schumacker,
said the president,
your hatred is ill-advised. The court will put the proper value upon your system of defense.
The bishop then said, turning to the short man who seemed to fill the office of recorder and prosecutor, Mr. Private Secretary, is this Hackett one of your clients?
No, your reverence,
replied the secretary. Does anyone know what has become of him?
He was not captured. He has disappeared.
It seemed as if the private secretary tried to steady his voice as he said this.
I rather think that he has vanished altogether, said Schumacker.
The bishop continued. Mr. Secretary, is anyone in pursuit of this Hackett? Has anyone a description of him? Before the private secretary could answer, one of the prisoners rose. He was a young miner with a stern, proud face. He is easily described, said he in a firm voice. This contemptible Hackett, Schumacker's agent, is a man of low stature, with an open countenance, like the mouth of hell. Stay, Mr. Bishop, his voice is very like that of the gentleman writing at the table over there, whom your reverence calls, I believe, private secretary. And truly, if the room were not so dark, and the private secretary had less hair to hide his face, I could almost swear that he looked very much like the traitor Hackett.
Our brother speaks truly,
cried the prisoners on either side of the young miner.
Indeed,
muttered Schumacker with a look of triumph. The secretary involuntarily started, whether from fear or from the indignation which he felt at being compared to Hackett. The president, who himself seemed disturbed, hurriedly exclaimed,
Prisoners, remember that you are only to speak in answer to a question from the court, and do not insult the officers of the law by unworthy comparisons.
But, Mr. President, said the bishop, this is a mere matter of description. If the guilty Hackett has points of resemblance to your secretary, it may be useful to— The president cut him short.
Hans of Iceland, you who have had such frequent intercourse with Hackett, tell us, to satisfy the worthy bishop, whether the fellow really resembles our honorable private secretary. Not at all, sir, unhesitatingly answered the giant. You see, my lord bishop, added the president. The bishop acknowledged his satisfaction by a bow, and the president, addressing another prisoner, pronounced the usual formula. What is your name?
Wilfrid Cannibal, from the Kiolen Mountains.
Were you among the insurgents?
Yes, sir. The truth at all costs. I was captured in the cursed defile of Black Pillar. I was the chief of the mountaineers.
Who urged you to the crime of rebellion?
Our brothers the miners complained of the royal protectorate, and that was very natural, was it not, your worship?
If you had nothing but a mud hut and a couple of paltry foxskins, you would not like to have them taken from you. The government would not listen to their petitions. Then, sir, they made up their minds to rebel, and begged us to help them. Such a slight favor could not be refused by brothers who say the same prayers and worship the same saints. That's the whole story." "Did nobody," said the president, "excite, encourage, and direct your insurrection?" "There was a Mr. Hacket who was forever talking to us about rescuing a count who was imprisoned at Munkholm, whose messenger he said he was. We promised to do as he asked, because it was nothing to us to set one more captive free." "Was not this count's name Schumacher or Griffenfeld, fellow?" "Exactly so, your worship." "Did you never see him?" "No, sir. But if he be that old man who told you that he had so many names just now, I must confess—" "What?" interrupted the president. "That he has a very beautiful white beard, sir, almost as handsome a one as my sister Maase's husband's father, of the village of Serb, and he lived to be 120 years old." The darkness of the room prevented any one from seeing whether the president looked disappointed at the mountaineer's simple answer. He ordered the archers to produce certain scarlet flags. "Wilfried Kennybol," he asked, "do you recognize these flags?" "Yes, your grace. They were given to us by Hacket in Count Schumacher's name. The count also distributed arms to the miners, for we did not need them, we mountaineers who live by our gun and game bag. And I myself, sir, such as you see me, trussed as I am like a miserable fowl to be roasted, have more than once, in one of our deep valleys, brought down an old eagle flying so high that it looked like a lark or a thrush." "You hear, judges," remarked the private secretary. "The prisoner Schumacher distributed arms and banners to the rebels through Hacket." "Kennybol," asked the president, "have you anything more to say?" "Nothing, your grace, except that I do not deserve death. I only lend a hand in brotherly love to the miners, and I'll venture to say before all your worships that my bullet, old hunter as I am, never touched one of the king's deer." The president, without answering this plea, cross-examined Kennybol's two companions. They were the leaders of the miners. The older of the two, who stated that his name was Jonas, repeated Kennybol's testimony in slightly different words. The other, the same young man who had noticed such a strong resemblance between the private secretary and the treacherous Hacket, called himself Norbith, and proudly avowed his share in the rebellion, but refused to reveal anything regarding Hacket and Schumacher, saying that he had sworn secrecy, and had forgotten everything but that oath. In vain the president tried threats and entreaties, the obstinate youth was not to be moved. Moreover, he insisted that he had not rebelled on Schumacher's account, but simply because his old mother was cold and hungry. He did not deny that he might deserve to die, but he declared that it would be unjust to kill him, because in killing him they would also kill his poor mother, who had done nothing to merit punishment. When Norbith ceased speaking, the private secretary briefly summed up the heavy charges against the prisoners, and more especially against Schumacher. He read some of the seditious mottos on the flags, and showed how the general agreement of the answers of the ex-chancellor's accomplices, and even the silence of Norbith, bound by a fanatical oath, tended to inculpate him. "There now remains," he said in close, "but a single prisoner to be examined, and we have strong reasons for thinking him the secret agent of the authority who has ill protected the peace of the province of Trondheim. This authority has favored, if not by his guilty connivance, at least by his fatal negligence, the outbreak of the revolt which must destroy all these unhappy men, and restore Schumacher to the scaffold from which the king's clemency so generously preserved him." Ethel, whose fears for Ordener were now converted into cruel apprehensions for her father, shuddered at these ominous words, and wept floods of tears when her father rose and said quietly, "Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, I admire your skill. Have you summoned the hangman?" The unfortunate girl thought her cup of bitterness was full. She was mistaken. The sixth prisoner now stood up. With a superb gesture, he swept back the hair which covered his face, and replied to the president's questions in a clear, firm voice. "My name is Ordener Guldenlew, Baron Thorwick, Knight of the Dannebrog." An exclamation of surprise escaped the secretary. "The viceroy's son! The viceroy's son!" repeated every voice, as if the words were taken up by countless echoes.
The president shrank back in his seat. The judges, hitherto motionless upon the bench, bent toward one another in confusion, like trees beaten by opposing winds. The commotion was even greater in the audience. The spectators climbed upon stone cornices and iron rails. The entire assembly spoke through a single mouth, and the guards, forgetting to insist upon silence, added their ejaculations to the general uproar. Only those accustomed to sudden emotions can imagine Ethel's feelings. Who could describe that unwonted mixture of agonizing joy and delicious grief, that anxious expectation which was alike fear and hope, and yet not quite either? He stood before her, but he could not see her. There was her beloved Ordener, her Ordener, whom she had believed dead, whom she knew was lost to her, her friend who had deceived her, and whom she adored with renewed adoration. He was there, yes, he was there. She was not the victim of a vain dream. Oh, it was really he, that Ordener, alas, whom she had seen in dreams more often than in reality. But did he appear within these gloomy precincts as an angel of deliverance, or a spirit of evil? Was she to hope in him, or to tremble for him? 1,000 conjectures crowded upon her at once, and oppressed her mind like a flame choked by too much fuel. All the ideas and sensations which we have suggested flashed through her brain as the son of the Norwegian viceroy pronounced his name. She was the first to recognize him, and before anyone else had recognized him, she had fainted. She soon recovered her senses for the second time, thanks to the attentions of her mysterious neighbor. With pale cheeks she again opened her eyes, in which the tears had been suddenly dried. She cast an eager glance at the young man still standing unmoved amid the general confusion. And after all agitation had ceased in the court and among the people, Ordener Guldenlew's name still rang in her ears. With painful alarm she observed that he wore his arm in a sling, and that his wrists were chained. She noticed that his mantle was torn in several places, and that his faithful sword no longer hung at his side. Nothing escaped her solicitude, for the eye of a lover is like that of a mother. Her whole soul flew to the rescue of him whom she could not shield with her body, and, be it said to the glory and the shame of love, in that room which contained her father and her father's persecutors, Ethel saw but one man. Silence was gradually restored. The president resumed his examination of the viceroy's son. " My lord Baron," said he in a tremulous voice. " I am not my lord Baron here," firmly answered Ordener. " I am Ordener Guldenlew, just as he who was once Count Griffenfeld is John Schumacher here." The president hesitated for a moment, then went on. " Well, Ordener Guldenlew, it is doubtless by some unlucky accident that you are brought before us. The rebels must have captured you while you were traveling, and forced you to join them, and it is probably in this way that you were found in their ranks." The secretary rose. " Noble judges, the mere name of the viceroy's son is a sufficient plea for him. Baron Ordener Guldenlew cannot by any possibility be a rebel. Our illustrious president has given a clear explanation of his unfortunate arrest among the rebels. The noble prisoner's only error is in not sooner revealing his name. We request that he may be set free at once, abandoning all charges against him, and only regretting that he should have been seated upon a bench degraded by the criminal Schumacher and his accomplices." " What would you do ?" cried Ordener. " The private secretary," said the president, " withdraws the charges against you." " He is wrong," replied Ordener in a loud, clear voice. " I alone, of all here, should be accused, judged, and condemned." He paused for a moment, and added in a less resolute tone, " For I alone am guilty." " You alone guilty !" exclaimed the president. " You alone guilty ?" repeated the secretary. A fresh burst of astonishment was heard in the audience. The wretched Ethel shuddered. She did not reflect that this declaration from her lover would save her father. She thought only of her Ordener's death. " Silence in the court !" said the president, possibly taking advantage of this brief tumult to collect his thoughts and recover his self possession. " Ordener Guldenlew," he resumed, " explain yourself." The young man mused an instant, then sighed heavily, and uttered these words in a tone of calm submission. " Yes, I know that an infamous death awaits me. I know that my life might have been bright and fair. But God reads my heart, God alone. I am about to accomplish the most urgent duty of my life.
I am about to sacrifice to it my blood, perhaps my honor. But I feel that I shall die without regret or remorse. Do not be surprised at my words, judges. There are mysteries in the soul and in the destiny of man which man cannot penetrate, and which are judged in heaven alone. Hear me, therefore, and act toward me as your conscience may dictate when you have pardoned these unfortunate men, and more especially the much injured Schumacher, who has already, in his long captivity, expiated many more crimes than any one man could ever commit. Yes, I am guilty, noble judges, and I alone. Schumacher is innocent. These other unhappy men were merely led astray. I am the author of the insurrection among the miners. You! Exclaimed the president and his private secretary with a singular look upon their faces. I. And do not interrupt me again, gentlemen. I am in haste to finish. For by accusing myself, I exonerate these poor prisoners. I excited the miners in Schumacher's name. I distributed those banners to the rebels. I sent them money and arms in the name of the prisoner of Munkholm. Hacket was my agent. At the name of Hacket, the private secretary made a gesture of stupefied amazement. Ordener continued. I will not trespass on your time, gentlemen. I was captured among the miners, whom I persuaded to revolt. I alone did everything. Now judge me. If I have proved my guilt, I have also proved the innocence of Schumacher and the poor wretches whom you deem his accomplices. The young man spoke these words, his eyes raised to heaven. Ethel, almost lifeless, scarcely breathed, but it seemed to her that Ordener, although he exculpated her father, pronounced his name most bitterly. The young man's language terrified and amazed her, although she could not comprehend it. Of all she heard, she grasped nothing but misery. A sentiment of similar nature seemed to engross the president. He was scarcely able to believe his ears. Nevertheless, he asked the viceroy's son, If you are indeed the sole author of this revolt, what was your object in instigating it? I cannot tell you. Ethel shivered when she heard the president reply in a somewhat angry tone. Had you not an intrigue with Schumacher's daughter? But Ordener, though in chains, advanced toward the bench and exclaimed, in accents of indignation, Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, content yourself with my life, which I place in your hands. Respect a noble and innocent girl. Do not a second time attempt to dishonor her. Ethel, who felt the blood rise to her face, did not comprehend the meaning of the words a second time, upon which her defender laid such emphasis. But by the rage expressed in the president's features, it seemed that he understood them. Ordener Guldenlew, do not forget the respect due to the king's justice and the officers of the law. I reprimand you in the name of the court. I now summon you anew to declare your purpose in committing the crime of which you accuse yourself. I repeat that I cannot tell you. Was it not to deliver Schumacher? Inquired the secretary. Ordener was silent. Do not persist in silence, prisoner, said the president. It is proved that you have been in communication with Schumacher, and your confession of guilt rather implicates than exonerates the prisoner of Munkholm. You have paid frequent visits to Munkholm, and your motive was surely more than mere curiosity. Let this diamond buckle bear witness. The president took from the table a diamond buckle. Do you recognize it as your property? Yes. By what chance? Well, one of the rebels gave it, before he died, to our private secretary, averring that he received it from you in payment for rowing you across from Trondheim to Munkholm fortress. Now, I ask you, judges, if such a price paid to a common sailor does not prove the importance laid by the prisoner Ordener Guldenlew upon his reaching that prison, which is the one where Schumacher was confined. Ah, exclaimed the prisoner Kennybol, what your grace says is true. I recognize the buckle. It is the same story which our poor brother Gulden Steiper told me. Silence, said the president. Let Ordener Guldenlew answer. I will not deny, replied Ordener, that I desire to see Schumacher. But this buckle has no significance. It is forbidden to enter the fort wearing diamonds. The sailor who rowed me across complained of his poverty during our passage. I flung him this buckle, which I was not allowed to wear. Pardon me, your grace," interrupted the private secretary. " The rule does not include the viceroy's son. You could therefore —"" I did not wish to give my name." " Why not ?" asked the president. " I cannot tell you." " Your relations with Schumacker and his daughter prove that the object of your conspiracy was to set them free." Schumacker, who had hitherto shown no sign of attention save an occasional scornful shrug of the shoulders, rose. " To set me free ! The object of this infernal plot was to compromise and ruin me, as it still is. Do you think that Ordener Guldenlew would confess his share in this crime unless he had been captured among the rebels ? Oh, I see that he inherits his father's hatred of me. And as for the relations which you suppose exist between him and myself and my daughter, let him know, that accursed Guldenlew, that my daughter also inherits my loathing for him, for the whole race of Guldenlews and d'Ahlefelds." Ordener sighed deeply, while Ethel in her heart disclaimed her father's assertion, and he fell back upon his bench, quivering with wrath. " The court will decide for itself," said the president. Ordener, who at Schumacker's words had silently cast down his eyes, seemed to awake. " Oh, hear me, noble judges. You are about to examine your consciences. Do not forget that Ordener Guldenlew is alone guilty. Schumacker is innocent. These other unfortunate men were deceived by my agent Hacket. I did everything else." Kennybol interrupted him. " His worship says truly, judges, for it was he who undertook to bring Hans of Iceland to us. I only hope that name may not bring me ill luck. I know that it was this young man who ventured to seek him out in Walderhog cave, to persuade him to be our leader. He confided the secret of his undertaking to me in Surb village, at the house of my brother Braal. And for the rest, too, the young gentleman says truly. We were deceived by that confounded Hacket, whence it follows that we do not deserve death." " Mr. Secretary," said the president, " the hearing is ended. What are your conclusions ?" The secretary rose, bowed several times to the court, passed his finger under the folds of his lace band without taking his eyes from the president's face. At last he pronounced the following words in a dull, measured voice :" Mr. President, most worthy judges, it is a true bill. Ordener Guldenlew, who has forever tarnished the glory of an illustrious name, has only succeeded in establishing his own guilt, without proving the innocence of ex-chancellor Schumacker and his accomplices, Hans of Iceland, Wilfred Kennybol, Jonas, and Norbith. I require the court to declare the 6 prisoners guilty of the crime of high treason in the 1st degree." A vague murmur rose from the crowd. The president was about to dismiss the court when the bishop asked for a brief hearing. " Learned judges, it is proper that the prisoner's defense should be heard last. I could wish that they had a better advocate, for I am old and feeble, and have no other strength than that which proceeds from God. I am confounded at the secretary's severe sentence. There is no proof of my client Schumacker's crime. There is no evidence that he has had any direct share in the insurrection. And since my other client, Ordener Guldenlew, confesses that he made unlawful use of Schumacker's name, and moreover that he is the sole author of this damnable sedition, all evidence against Schumacker disappears. You should therefore acquit him. I recommend to your Christian indulgence the other prisoners, who were only led astray like the good shepherd's sheep. And even young Ordener Guldenlew, who has at least the merit, very great in the sight of God, of confessing his crime. Reflect, judges, that he is still at the age when a man may err and even fall. But God does not refuse to support or to raise him up. Ordener Guldenlew bears scarce a fourth the burden of years which weigh down my head. Place in the balance of your judgment his youth and inexperience, and do not so soon deprive him of the life which the Lord has but lately given him." The old man ceased and took his place beside Ordener, who smiled. While at the invitation of the president, the judges rose from the bench and silently crossed the threshold of the dread scene of their deliberations. While a handful of men were deciding the fate of 6 fellow beings within that terrible sanctuary, the prisoners remained motionless upon their seat between 2 files of halberdiers. Schumacker, his head on his breast, seemed absorbed in meditation. The giant stared to the right and left with stupid assurance. Jonas and Kennybol, with clasped hands, prayed in low tones, while their comrade, Norbith, stamped his foot or shook his chains with a convulsive start. Between him and the venerable bishop, who was reading the penitential psalms, sat Ordener, with folded arms and eyes lifted to heaven. Behind them was the noise of the crowd, which swelled high when the judges left the room. The famous prisoner of Munkholm, the much dreaded demon of Iceland, and above all the viceroy's son, were the objects of every thought, every speech, and every glance. The uproar, mingled with groans, laughter, and confused cries, rose and fell like a flame flickering in the wind. Thus passed several hours of anxious expectation, so long that every one was astonished that they could be contained in a single night. From time to time a glance was cast toward the door of the anteroom, but there was nothing to be seen save the two soldiers pacing to and fro with their glittering partisans before the fatal entrance, like two silent ghosts. At last the lamps and torches began to burn dim, and the first pale rays of dawn were piercing the narrow windows of the room, when the awful door opened. Profound silence instantly, and as if by magic, took the place of all the confusion, and the only sounds heard were the hurried breathing and the vague slight stir of the multitude in suspense. The judges, proceeding slowly from the anteroom, resumed their places on the bench, the president at their head. The private secretary, who had seemed absorbed in thought during their absence, bowed and said, "Mr. President, what sentence does the court, from whose decision there is no appeal, pronounce in the king's name? We are ready to hear it with religious respect." The judge, seated at the president's right hand, rose, holding a roll of parchment. "His Grace, our illustrious president, exhausted by the length of this session, has deigned to commission me, Lord Mayor of the province of Trondheim, and the natural president of this worshipful court, to read in his stead the sentence pronounced in the name of the king. I am about to fulfill this honorable but painful duty, requesting the audience to hear the king's impeccable justice in silence." The Lord Mayor's voice then assumed a grave and solemn intonation, and every heart beat faster. "In the name of our revered master and lawful sovereign, King Christian, we, the judges of the Supreme Court of the province of Trondheim, summoned to decide in the cases of John Schumacher, prisoner of the state, Wilfrid Cannibal, native of the Kjörlen Mountains, Jonas, royal miner, Norbith, royal miner, Hans of Klipstadur in Iceland, and Ordener Guldenlew, Baron Thorwig, Knight of the Dannebrog, all accused of high treason and lese majesty in the first degree. Hans of Iceland being moreover charged with the crimes of murder, arson, and robbery. Do find 1. That John Schumacher is not guilty. 2. That Wilfrid Cannibal, Jonas, and Norbith are guilty, but are recommended to mercy because they were led astray. 3. That Hans of Iceland is guilty of all the crimes laid to his charge. 4. That Ordener Guldenlew is guilty of high treason and lese majesty in the first degree. The judge paused an instant as if to take breath. Ordener fixed upon him a look of celestial joy. John Schumacher, resumed the judge, the court acquits you and remands you to prison. Cannibal, Jonas, and Norbith, the court commutes the penalty which you have incurred to imprisonment for life and a fine of 1,000 crowns each. Hans of Klipstadur, murderer and incendiary, you will be taken this night to Munkholm parade ground, and hanged by the neck until you are dead, dead, dead. Ordener Guldenlew, traitor, after having been stripped of your titles in presence of this court, you will be conducted this very night to the same place with a lighted torch in your hand, and there your head shall be hewn off, your body burned, your ashes strewn to the winds, and your head exposed upon a stake. Let all withdraw. Such is the sentence rendered by the king's justice. The Lord Mayor had scarcely ended these fatal words when a shriek rang through the room. This shriek horrified the spectators even more than did the fearful terms of the death sentence. This shriek, for a brief moment, turned the calm and radiant face of the condemned Ordener pale. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 44. Misfortune made them equals. Charles Nodier. All was over now. Ordener's work was done. He had saved the father of the woman he loved. He had saved her too, by preserving her father to protect her. The young man's noble plot to save Schumacker's life had succeeded. Nothing else mattered now. It only remained for him to die. Let those who deem him guilty or foolish judge the generous Ordener now as he judges himself in his own soul with holy rapture. For it had been his one thought, when he entered the rebel ranks, that if he could not prevent Schumacker from carrying out his guilty purpose, he might at least help him to escape punishment by drawing it upon his own head. Alas, he thought, Schumacker is undoubtedly guilty, but embittered as he is by misfortune and imprisonment, his crime is excusable. He sighs to be set free. He struggles to acquire his liberty, even by rebellion. Besides, what would become of my Ethel if her father were taken from her, if she should lose him by the gallows, if fresh disgrace should blast his name, what would become of her, helpless and unprotected, alone in her cell, or roaming through a world of foes? This thought determined him to make the sacrifice, and he joyfully prepared for it. It is a lover's greatest happiness to lay down his life, I do not say for the life, but for a smile or a tear of the loved object. He was accordingly captured with the rebels, was dragged before the judges assembled to condemn Schumacker, his generous falsehood was uttered, he was sentenced, he must die a cruel death, suffer shameful torments, leave behind him a stained name. But what cared the noble youth? He had saved his Ethel's father. He sat chained in a damp dungeon, where light and air never entered save through dark holes. Beside him was a supply of food for the remnant of his existence, a loaf of black bread and a jug of water. An iron collar weighed down his neck, iron fetters were about his hands and feet. Every hour that passed robbed him of a greater portion of his life than a year would bear away from other mortals. He was lost in a delicious dream. Perhaps my memory will not die with me, at least in one human heart. Perhaps she will deign to shed a tear in return for the blood I so freely shed for her. Perhaps she will sometimes heave a sigh for him who sacrificed his life for her. Perhaps in her virgin thoughts the dim image of her friend may sometimes appear. And who knows what lies behind the veil of death? Who knows if our souls, freed from their material prison, may not sometimes return to watch over the souls of those they love, and hold mysterious communion with those sweet companions, still prisoned in the flesh, and in secret bring them angelic comfort and heavenly bliss? And yet, bitter reflections would sometimes mingle with these consoling meditations. The hatred which Schumacker had expressed for him at the very moment of his self-sacrifice oppressed him. The agonized shriek which he had heard at the same instant with his death sentence had moved him deeply. For he alone, of all the assembly, recognized that voice and understood that misery. And should he never again see his Ethel? Must his last moments be passed within the selfsame walls that contained her, and he be still unable to touch her soft hand once more to hear the gentle voice of her for whom he was about to die? He had yielded thus to those vague, sad musings which are to the mind what sleep is to the body, when the hoarse creak of rusty bolts struck harshly on his ear, already attuned to the music of the sphere to which he was so soon to take his flight. The heavy iron door grated upon its hinges. The young prisoner rose calmly, almost gladly, for he thought that the executioner had come for him, and he had already cast aside his life like the cloak beneath his feet. He was mistaken. A slender white figure stood upon the threshold, like a radiant vision. Ordener doubted his own eyes, and wondered if he were not already in heaven. It was she. It was his Ethel. The girl fell into his fettered embrace. She covered his hands with tears, and dried them with her long black hair.
Kissing his chains, she bruised her pure lips upon those infamous irons. She did not speak, but her whole heart seemed ready to burst forth in the first word which might break through her sobs. He felt the most celestial joy which he had known since his birth. He gently pressed his Ethel to his breast, and the combined powers of earth and hell could not at that moment have loosed the arms which encircled her. The knowledge of his approaching death lent a certain solemnity to his rapture, and he held his Ethel as close as if he had already taken possession of her for all eternity. He did not ask this angel how she had gained access to him. She was there. Could he waste a thought on anything else? Nor was he surprised. He never asked how this proscribed, feeble, lonely girl, in spite of triple doors of iron and triple ranks of soldiers, had contrived to open her own prison and that of a lover. It seemed to him quite simple. He had a perfect appreciation of the power of love. Why speak with the voice when the soul can speak as readily? Why not allow the body to listen silently to the mysterious language of the spirit? Both were silent, because there are certain emotions which can find expression in silence only. At last the young girl lifted her head from her lover's throbbing heart. "Ordener," said she, "I am here to save you." And she uttered these words of hope with a pang. Ordener smiled and shook his head. "To save me, Ethel? You deceive yourself. Escape is impossible." "Alas! I am but too well aware of that. This castle is crowded with soldiers, and every door is guarded by archers and jailers who never sleep." She added with an effort, "But I bring you another means of safety." "No, no, your hope is vain. Do not delude yourself with idle fancies, Ethel. A few hours hence the axe will cruelly dispel them." "Oh, do not say so, Ordener. You shall not die. Oh, spare me that dreadful thought. Or rather, no, let me behold it in all its horror, to give me strength to save you, and sacrifice myself." There was a strange expression in the young girl's voice. Ordener gazed at her tenderly. "Sacrifice yourself? What do you mean?" She hid her face in her hands and sobbed almost inarticulately. "Oh, God!" The struggle was brief. She overcame her emotion. Her eyes sparkled, her lips wore a smile. She was as beautiful as an angel ascending from hell to heaven. "Listen, my own Ordener. Your scaffold shall never be reared. If you will but promise to marry Ulrica d'Ahlefeld, you may live." "Ulrica d'Ahlefeld! That name from your lips, my Ethel!" "Do not interrupt me," she continued with the calm of a martyr undergoing the last pang. "I am sent here by Countess d'Ahlefeld. She promises to gain your pardon from the king, if in return you will agree to bestow your hand upon her daughter. I am here to obtain your oath to marry Ulrica and live for her. She chose me as her messenger because she thought that my voice might have some influence over you." "Ethel," said the condemned man in icy tones, "farewell. When you leave this cell, bid the hangman hasten his coming." She rose, stood before him one moment, pale and trembling, then her knees gave way beneath her, and she sank to the stone floor with clasped hands. "What have I done to him?" she muttered faintly. Ordener silently fixed his eyes upon the flags. "My lord," she said, dragging herself to him on her knees, "you do not answer me. Will you not speak to me once more? Then there is nothing left for me but to die." A tear stood in the young man's eye. "Ethel, you no longer love me." "Oh, God!" cried the poor girl, clasping his knees. "No longer love you? You say that I no longer love you, Ordener? Did you really say those words?" "You no longer love me, for you despise me." He repented these cruel words as soon as he had uttered them, for Ethel's tone was heart-rending as she threw her adored arms around his neck and exclaimed in a voice broken by tears, "Forgive me, my beloved Ordener. Forgive me as I forgive you. I despise you. Great heavens! Are you not my pride, my idol, my all? Tell me, was there aught in my words but deep love and ardent adoration? Alas,
Your stern language wounds me sorely when I came here to save you, my idolized Ordener, by sacrificing my whole life for yours.
Well, replied the young man, softened by the tears, and kissing them away, was it not a want of esteem to suppose that I would buy my life by forsaking you, by basely renouncing my oath, by sacrificing my love? He added, fixing his eye on Ethel, my love, for which I am about to shed my blood. Ethel uttered a deep groan as she answered,
Oh, hear me, Ordener, before you judge me so rashly. Perhaps I have more strength than usually falls to the lot of a weak woman. From our lofty prison window I saw them build your scaffold on the parade. Ordener, you do not know what fearful agony it is to see the slow preparations for the death of one whose life is an indissoluble part of your own. Countess d'Ahlefeld, at whose side I sat when I heard the judge pronounce your death sentence, came to the cell to which I had returned with my father. She asked me if I would save you. She proposed this hateful means. Ordener, my poor happiness must perish. I must give you up, renounce you forever. Yield to another, my Ordener, poor lonely Ethel's only joy, or deliver you to the executioner. They bid me choose between my own misery and your death. I cannot hesitate. He kissed this angel's hand with respectful worship. Neither do I hesitate, Ethel. You would not offer me life with Ulrica d'Ahlefeld's hand if you knew why I die. What? What secret mystery?
Let me keep this one secret from you, my beloved Ethel. I must die without letting you know whether you owe me gratitude or hatred for my death.
You must die? Must you then die? Oh God, it is but too true, and the scaffold stands ready even now. And no human power can save my Ordener, whom they will slay. Tell me, cast one look upon your slave, your wife, and tell me, promise me, beloved Ordener, that you will listen to me without anger. Are you very sure, answer me as you would answer to God, that you could not be happy with that woman, that Ulrica d'Ahlefeld? Are you very sure, Ordener? Perhaps she surely is, handsome, amiable, virtuous. She is far superior to her for whom you perish. Do not turn away your head, dear friend, dear Ordener. You are so noble and so young to mount the scaffold. Think, you might live with her in some gay city where you would lose all memory of this fatal dungeon. Your days would flow by peacefully, without a thought of me. I consent. You may drive me from your heart, erase my image from your thoughts, Ordener. Only live. Leave me here alone. Let me be the one to die. And believe me, when I know that you are in the arms of another, you need not fear for me. I shall not suffer long.
She paused. Her voice was drowned in tears. Still her grief-stricken countenance was radiant with her longing to win the ill-omened victory which must be her death. Ordener said, No more of this, Ethel. Let no name but yours and mine pass our lips at such a moment.
Alas, alas,
she replied.
Then you persist in dying?
I must. I shall go to the scaffold gladly for your sake. I should go to the altar with any other woman with horror and aversion. Say no more. You wound and distress me. She wept and murmured,
He will die, O God, a death of infamy.
The condemned man answered with a smile, Believe me, Ethel, there is less dishonor in my death than in such a life as you propose. At this instant his eye, glancing away from his weeping Ethel, observed an old man in clerical dress standing in the shadow under the low arched door. What do you want? Said he, hastily. My lord, I came with the Countess d'Ahlefeld's messenger. You did not see me, and I waited silently until you should notice me. In fact, Ordener had eyes for Ethel only, and she, at the sight of Ordener, had forgotten her companion. I am, continued the old man, the minister whose duty it is. I understand, said the young man. I am ready.
The minister advanced toward him. God is also ready to receive you, my son. Sir, said Ordener, your face is not unknown to me. I must have seen you elsewhere. The minister bowed. I too recognize you, my son. We met in Vigla Tower. We both proved upon that occasion the fallibility of human words. You promised me the pardon of 12 unhappy prisoners, and I put no faith in your promise, being unable to guess that you were the viceroy's son. And you, my lord, who reckoned upon your power and your rank when you made me that promise. Ordener finished the thought which Athanasius Munder dared not put into words. Cannot now obtain pardon even for myself. You are right, sir. I had too little reverence for the future. It has punished me by showing me that its power is greater than mine. The minister bent his head. God is great, said he. Then he raised his kind eyes to Ordener, adding, God is good. Ordener, who seemed preoccupied, exclaimed after a brief pause, Listen, sir, I will keep the promise which I made you in Vigla Tower. When I am dead, go to Bergen, seek out my father, the Viceroy of Norway, and tell him that the last favor which his son asks of him is to pardon your 12 proteges. He will grant it, I am sure. A tear of emotion moistened the wrinkled cheek of Athanasius. My son, your soul must be filled with noble thoughts, if in the selfsame hour you can reject your own pardon and generously implore that of others. For I heard your refusal, and although I blame such dangerous and inordinate affection, I was deeply touched by it. Now I ask myself, unde scelus, how could a man who approaches so near to the model of true justice soil his conscience with the crime for which you are condemned? Father, I did not tell my secret to this angel, I cannot reveal it to you, but believe that I am not condemned for any crime of mine. What? Explain yourself, my son. Do not urge me, firmly answered the young man. Let me take my secret with me to the grave. This man cannot be guilty, muttered the minister. Then drawing from his breast a black crucifix, he placed it on a sort of altar rudely shaped from a granite slab, resting against the damp prison wall. Beside the crucifix he laid a small lighted lamp, which he had brought with him, and an open Bible. My son, meditate and pray. I will return a few hours hence. Come, he added, turning to Ethel, who during this conversation had preserved a solemn silence. We must leave the prisoner. Our time has passed. She rose, calm and radiant. A divine spark flashed from her eyes as she said, Sir, I cannot go yet. You must first unite Ethel Schumacher to her husband, Ordener Guldenlew. She looked at Ordener. If you were still free, happy, and powerful, my Ordener, I should weep, and I should shrink from linking my fatal destiny with yours. But now that you need no longer dread the contagion of my misfortune, that you, like me, are a captive, disgraced and oppressed, now that you are about to die, I come to you, hoping that you will at least deign, Ordener, my lord and husband, to allow her who could never have shared your life to be your companion in death. For you love me too much, do you not, to doubt for an instant that I shall die with you? The prisoner fell at her feet and kissed the hem of her gown. You, old man, she resumed, must take the place of family and parents. This cell shall be our temple, this stone our altar. Here is my ring. We kneel before God and before you. Bless us, and pronounce the sacred words which shall unite Ethel Schumacher and Ordener Guldenlew, her lord. And they knelt together before the priest, who regarded them with mingled astonishment and pity. How, my children, what would you do? Father, said the girl, time presses. God and death wait for us. In this life we sometimes meet with irresistible powers, supreme wills to which we yield instantly as if they were more than human. The priest raised his eyes, sighing, May the Lord forgive me if I do wrong. You love each other. You have but little time to love on earth. I do not think I shall fail in my allegiance to God if I legalize your love. The sweet and solemn ceremony was performed. With the final blessing of the priest, they rose a wedded pair. The prisoner's face beamed with painful joy.
He seemed for the first time conscious of the bitterness of death, now that he realized the sweetness of life. The features of his companion were sublime in their expression of grandeur and simplicity. She still felt the modesty of a maiden, and already exulted as a young wife. "Hear me, Ordener," said she. "Is it not fortunate that we must die, since we could never have been united in life? Do you know, love, what I will do? I will stand at the window of my cell, where I can see you mount the scaffold, so that our spirits may wing their flight to heaven together. If I should die before the axe falls, I will wait for you, for we are husband and wife, my adored Ordener, and this night our coffin shall be our bridal bed." He pressed her to his throbbing heart, and could only utter these words which for him summed up all human happiness. "Ethel, you are mine." "My children," said the chaplain in a broken voice, "say farewell. It is time." "Alas!" cried Ethel. All her angelic strength returned, and she knelt before the prisoner. "Farewell, my beloved Ordener. My lord, give me your blessing." The prisoner yielded to this touching request, then turned to take leave of the venerable Athanasius Munder. The old man was kneeling at his feet. "What do you wish, father?" he asked in surprise. The old man gazed at him with sweet humility. "Your blessing, my son." "May heaven bless you, and grant you all the happiness which your prayers call down upon your brother man," replied Ordener in touched and solemn tones. Soon the sepulchral arches heard their last kisses and their last farewells. Soon the rude bolts creaked noisily into place, and the iron doors separated the youthful pair who were to die, only to meet again in eternity. End of chapter 44. Chapter 45 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 45. I will give 2,000 crowns to any man who shall deliver over to me Luis Perez, dead or alive. Calderon, Luis Perez of Galicia.
Baron Votone, colonel of the Munkholm musketeers, which of the men who fought under your command at Black Pillar Pass took Hans of Iceland prisoner? Name him to the court, that he may receive the 1,000 crowns reward offered for the capture.
The president of the court thus addressed the colonel of musketeers. The court was in session, for according to old Norwegian custom, a court from whose sentence there is no appeal cannot adjourn until the sentence has been carried out. Before the judges stood the giant, who had just been led in again, with the rope round his neck from which he was soon to hang. The colonel, seated at the table with the private secretary, rose and bowed to the court and to the bishop, who had reascended his throne. My lord judges, the soldier who captured Hans of Iceland is present. His name is Toric Belfast, second musketeer of my regiment.
Let him stand forth,
replied the president,
and receive the promised reward.
A young soldier in the Munkholm uniform stepped forward.
You are Toric Belfast?
asked the president. Yes, your worship.
It was you who took Hans of Iceland prisoner.
Yes, by the aid of Saint Beelzebub, I did, please your worship. A heavy bag of money was placed before the bench.
Do you recognize this man as the famous Hans of Iceland?
Added the president, pointing to the fettered giant. I am better acquainted with my Kitty's pretty face than with that of Hans of Iceland, but I declare, by the halo of Saint Belphegor, that if Hans of Iceland be anywhere, it is in the shape of that big devil.
Advance, Toric Belfast,
said the president.
Here are the 1,000 crowns offered by the Lord Mayor.
The soldier hurried toward the bench, when a voice rose from the crowd.
Munkholm musketeer, you never captured Hans of Iceland.
By all the blessed devils, cried the soldier, turning around. I own nothing but my pipe and the moment of time in which I speak, but still I promise to give 10,000 gold crowns to the man who says that, if he can prove his words. And folding his arms, he cast an assured glance over the audience. Well,
Let the man who spoke show himself.
It is I,
said a small man, elbowing his way through the crowd. The newcomer was wrapped in sealskin, like a Greenlander, his outlandish garb hanging stiffly about him. His beard was black, and thick hair of the same color, falling over his red eyebrows, concealed a hideous face. Neither his hands nor his arms were visible. "Oh, it is you, is it?" said the soldier with a loud laugh. "And who, then, do you say it was, my fine gentleman, that had the honor of capturing that infernal giant?" The little man shook his head, and said with a malicious smile,
"It was I."
At this instant Baron Votahun fancied that he recognized the mysterious being who had warned him at Skongen of the arrival of the rebels. Chancellor d'Ahlefeld thought he recognized his host at Arbor Ruin, and the private secretary a certain peasant from Oelmo, who wore a similar dress, and who had pointed out the lair of Hans of Iceland. But the three being separated, they could not impart to one another this fleeting impression, which the differences of feature and costume, afterward observed, must have soon dissipated. "Indeed, it was you, was it?" ironically observed the soldier. "If it were not for your Greenland seal's costume, by the look which you cast at me, I should be tempted to take you for another ridiculous dwarf, who tried to pick a quarrel with me at the Spladgest a fortnight or so ago. It was the very day that they brought in the body of Jill Studd, the miner."
"Jill Studd,"
broke in the little man, with a shudder. "Yes, Jill Studd," repeated the soldier, with an air of indifference. "The rejected lover of a girl who was sweetheart to a comrade of mine, and for whose sake he died, like the fool that he was." The little man said in hollow tones,
"Was there not also the body of an officer of your regiment at the Spladgest?"
"Exactly. I shall remember that day as long as I live. I forgot that it was the hour for the tattoo, and I was arrested when I got back to the fort. That officer was Captain Dispolsen." At this name the private secretary rose. "These two fellows abuse the patience of the court. We beg the president to cut short this idle chatter." "By my Kitty's good name, I ask nothing better," said Toric Belfast, "provided your worships will give me the 1,000 crowns offered for the head of Hans, for it was I who took him prisoner."
"You lie!"
cried the little man. The soldier clapped his hand to his sword. "It is very lucky for you, you rascal, that we are in the presence of the court, where a soldier, even a Munkholm musketeer, must never resort to force."
"The reward,"
coldly observed the little man,
"belongs to me. For if it were not for me, you would never have won Hans of Iceland's head."
The indignant soldier swore that it was he who captured Hans of Iceland, when, wounded on the field of battle, he was just beginning to revive.
"Well,"
said his opponent,
"you may have captured him, but it was I who struck him down. If it had not been for me, you could never have taken him prisoner. Therefore, the 1,000 crowns are mine."
"It is false," replied the soldier. "It was not you who struck him down. It was an evil spirit, clad in the skins of wild beasts."
"It was I."
"No, no." The president ordered both parties to be silent. Then again asking Colonel Votahun whether it was really Toric Belfast who brought Hans of Iceland into camp a prisoner, at his assent he declared that the prize belonged to the soldier. The small man gnashed his teeth, and the musketeer greedily stretched out his hands for the sack.
"One moment,"
cried the little man.
"Mr. President, that money, according to the Lord Mayor's proclamation, was to be given to him who took Hans of Iceland."
"Well," said the judge. The little man turned to the giant.
"That man is not Hans of Iceland."
A murmur of surprise ran through the room. The president and private secretary moved uneasily in their chairs.
"No,"
emphatically reiterated the small man.
The money does not belong to the cursed musketeer of Munkholm, for that man is not Hans of Iceland.
Halberdiers, said the president, remove this madman. He has lost his senses.
The bishop interposed.
Will you allow me, most worthy president, to remark that you may, by refusing to hear this man, destroy the prisoner's last chance? I demand that he be confronted with the stranger. Reverend Bishop, the court will grant your request, replied the president, and addressing the giant, you have declared yourself to be Hans of Iceland. Do you persist in that statement? The prisoner answered, I do. I am Hans of Iceland. You hear, Bishop. The little man shouted in the same breath with the president.
You lie, mountaineer of Kjölen. You lie. Do not persist in bearing a name which must crush you. Remember that it has been fatal to you already.
I am Hans from Klipstadur in Iceland, repeated the giant, his eye riveted on the private secretary. The small man approached the Munkholm soldier, who, like the rest of the audience, had watched this scene with eager curiosity.
Mountaineer of Kjölen,
he cried.
They say that Hans of Iceland drinks human blood. If you be he, drink. Here it is.
And scarcely were the words out of his mouth, when, tossing his sealskin mantle over his shoulder, he plunged a dagger into the soldier's heart and flung his dead body at the giant's feet. A cry of fright and horror followed. The soldiers guarding the giant started back. The small man, swift as lightning, rushed upon the defenseless mountaineer, and with another blow of his dagger laid him upon the first corpse. Then, flinging off his cloak, his false hair, and black beard, he revealed his wiry limbs, hideously attired in the skins of wild beasts, and a face which inspired the beholders with even greater horror than did the bloody dagger which he brandished aloft, reeking with a double murder.
Ha! Judges, where is Hans of Iceland now?
Guards, seize that monster! Cried the startled judge.
Hans hurled his dagger into the center of the room.
It is useless to me if there are no more Munkholm soldiers here.
With these words he yielded unresistingly to the halberdiers and bowmen who surrounded him, prepared to lay siege to him as to a city. They chained the monster to the prisoner's bench, and the litter bore away his victims, one of whom, the mountaineer, still breathed. It is impossible to describe the various emotions of terror, astonishment, and indignation which, during this fearful scene, agitated the people, the guards, and the judges. When the brigand had taken his place, calm and unmoved, upon the fatal bench, a feeling of curiosity overcame every other impression, and breathless attention restored quiet. The venerable bishop rose.
My lord judges.
The bandit interrupted him.
Bishop of Trondheim, I am Hans of Iceland. Do not take the trouble to plead for me.
The private secretary rose.
Noble president.
The monster cut him short.
Private secretary, I am Hans of Iceland. Do not take the pains to accuse me.
Then, his feet in a pool of blood, he ran his bold, fierce eye over the court, the bowmen, and the crowd, and it seemed as if each of them trembled with fear at the glance of that one man, unarmed, chained, and alone.
Listen, judges. Expect no long speeches from me. I am the demon of Klipstadur. My mother was old Iceland, the land of volcanoes. Once that land was but one huge mountain. It was crushed by the hand of a giant, who fell from heaven and rested on its highest peak. I need not speak of myself. I am the descendant of Ingolf the Destroyer, and I bear his spirit within me. I have committed more murders and kindled more fires than all of you put together ever uttered unjust sentences in your lives. I have secrets in common with Chancellor d'Ahlefeld. I could drink every drop of blood that flows in your veins with delight. It is my nature to hate mankind, my mission to harm them. Colonel of the Munkholm Musketeers, it was I who warned you of the march of the miners through Black Pillar Pass, sure that you would kill numbers of men in those gorges. It was I who destroyed a whole battalion of your regiment by hurling granite boulders upon their heads. I did it to avenge my son. Now, judges, my son is dead. I came here in search of death. The soul of Ingolf oppresses me, because I must bear it alone, and can never transmit it to an heir. I am tired of life, since it can no longer be an example and a lesson to a successor. I have drunk enough blood. My thirst is quenched. Now, here I am. You may drink mine.
He was silent, and every voice repeated his awful words. The bishop said, "My son, what was your object in committing so many crimes?" The brigand laughed.
In faith, I swear, Reverend Bishop, it was not like your brother, the Bishop of Borglum, with a view to enrich myself. There was something in me which drove me to it.
God does not always dwell in his ministers, meekly replied the saintly old man. You would insult me, but I only wish I could defend you.
Your reverence wastes his breath. Go, ask your other brother, the Bishop of Skalholt in Iceland, to defend me. By Ingolf, it is a strange thing that two bishops should protect me, one in my cradle, the other at my tomb. Bishop, you are an old fool.
My son, do you believe in God?
Why not? There must be a God for us to blaspheme.
Cease, unhappy man. You are about to die, and you will not kiss the feet of Christ. Hans of Iceland shrugged his shoulders.
If I did so, it would be after the fashion of the Constable of Roll, who pulled the king over as he kissed his foot.
The bishop seated himself, deeply moved.
Come, judges, continued Hans of Iceland. Why this delay? If I were in your place, and you in mine, I would not keep you waiting so long for your death sentence.
The court withdrew. After a brief deliberation, they returned, and the president read aloud the sentence which declared that Hans of Iceland was to be hung by the neck until he was dead, dead, dead.
That's good, said the brigand. Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, I know enough about you to obtain a like sentence for you. But live, since you do naught but injure men. Oh, I am sure now that I shall not go to Nistheim.
The private secretary ordered the guards who led him away to place him in the Lion of Schleswig tower,
until a dungeon could be prepared for him in the quarters of the Munkholm regiment, where he might await his execution.
In the quarters of the Munkholm musketeers,
repeated the monster, with a growl of pleasure. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 46. However, the corpse of Ponce de Leon, which had remained beside the fountain, having been disfigured by the sun, the Moors of Alpujarres took possession of it and bore it to Granada. E. H., the captive of Ochali. Before dawn of the day so many of whose events we have already traced, at the very hour when Ordener's sentence was pronounced at Munkholm, the new keeper of the Trondhjem Spladgest, Benignus Bjergedry's former assistant and present successor, Oglypiglap, was abruptly aroused from his mattress by a violent series of raps, which fairly shook the building. He rose reluctantly, took his copper lamp, whose dim light dazzled his drowsy eyes, and went, swearing at the dampness of the dead house, to open to those who waked him so early from his sleep. They were fishers from Sparbo, who carried upon a litter, strewed with reeds, rushes, and seaweed, a corpse which they had found in the waters of the lake. They laid down their burden within the gloomy walls, and Oglypiglap gave them a receipt for it, so that they might claim their fee. Left alone in the Spladgest, he began to undress the corpse, which was remarkable for its length and leanness. The first thing which caught his eye, as he raised the cloth which covered it, was a vast periwig. "Why, really," said he, "this outlandish wig has passed through my hands before. It belonged to that young French dandy. And," he added, continuing his investigations, "here are the high boots of poor postilion Cramner, who was killed by his horses, and what the devil does this mean? The full black suit of Professor Singramtax, that learned old fogey who drowned himself not long ago. Who can this newcomer be that comes here clad in the cast-off apparel of all my ancient acquaintance?" He examined the face of the dead by the light of his lamp, but in vain. The features, already decomposed, had lost their original shape and color. He felt in the pockets and drew out some scraps of parchment soaked with water and stained with mud. He wiped them carefully on his leather apron, and succeeded in deciphering on one of them these disconnected and half-effaced phrases: Rudbeck, Saxon the grammarian; Arngrimson, Bishop of Hollum. There are but 2 counties in Norway, Larvik and Jarlsberg, and but 1 barony. Silver mines exist only at Kongsberg, lodestone and asbestos at Sundmoor, amethyst at Gulbrandshall, chalcedony, agate, and jasper at the Faroe Islands. At Nukahiva, in time of famine, men eat their wives and children. Thormodr Torfusson, Isleif, Bishop of Skalholt, first historian of Iceland. Mercury played at chess with the moon and won the 72nd part of a day. Maelstrom, whirlpool. Hirundo, Hirudo. Cicero. Chickpea, glory. The learned Frode. Odin consulted the head of Mimer the wise. Mahomet and his dove. Sertorius and his hind. The more the soil, the less gypsum it contains. I can scarcely believe my eyes, he cried, dropping the parchment. It is the writing of my old master, Benignus Bjergedry. Then, examining the corpse afresh, he recognized the long lean hands, the scanty hair, and the whole build of the unfortunate man. They were not so much out of the way after all, thought he, shaking his head, who charged him with sacrilege and necromancy. The devil carried him off to drown him in Lake Sparbo. What poor fools we mortals be! Who would have thought that Dr. Spiagudry, after taking so many people to board in his hostelry of the dead, would come here at last from afar to be cared for himself? The little Lapp philosopher lifted the body to remove it to one of his 6 granite beds, when he found that something heavy was fastened about the unhappy Spiagudry's neck by a leather cord.
Probably the stone with which the devil pitched him into the lake, he muttered. He was mistaken. It was a small iron box, upon which, on examining it closely, after wiping it carefully, he discovered a large, shield-shaped padlock. "Of course there is some deviltry in this box," said he. "The man was a sacrilegious sorcerer. I will hand it over to the bishop. It may contain an evil spirit." Then, taking it from the corpse, which he placed in the inner room, he hurried away to the bishop's palace, muttering a prayer as he went, as a charm against the dreadful box under his arm. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 47. Is it a man or an infernal spirit that speaks thus? What mischievous spirit torments thee thus? Show me the relentless foe who inhabits thy heart. Maturin. Hans of Iceland and Schumacher were in the same cell in the Schleswig Tower. The acquitted ex-chancellor paced slowly to and fro, his eyes heavy with bitter tears. The condemned brigand laughed at his chains, though surrounded by guards. The two prisoners studied each other long and silently. It seemed as if both felt themselves and mutually recognized each other as enemies of mankind. "Who are you?" at length asked the ex-chancellor.
"I will tell you my name,"
replied the bandit,
"to make you shun me. I am Hans of Iceland."
Schumacher advanced toward him.
"Take my hand," said he.
"Do you wish me to devour it?"
"Hans of Iceland," rejoined Schumacher, "I like you because you hate mankind."
"And for that reason I hate you."
"Hark ye, I hate men as you do, because they have returned me evil for good."
"You do not hate them as I do. I hate them because they have returned me good for evil."
Schumacher shuddered at the monster's expression. In vain he conquered his natural disposition, he could not sympathize with this fiend.
"Yes," he exclaimed, "I abhor men because they are false, ungrateful, cruel. I owe to them all the misery of my life."
"So much the better. I owe them all the pleasure of mine."
"What pleasure?"
"The pleasure of feeling their quivering flesh throb beneath my teeth, their hot blood moisten my parched throat, the rapture of crushing living beings against sharp rocks, and hearing the shriek of my victims mingle with the sound of their breaking limbs. These are the pleasures which I owe to man."
Schumacher shrank in horror from the monster whom he had approached with something like pride in his resemblance to him. Pierced with shame, he hid his wrinkled face in his hands, for his eyes were full of tears of anger, not against mankind, but against himself. His great and noble heart began to revolt at the hatred he had so long cherished, when he saw it reflected in Hans of Iceland's heart as in a fearful mirror.
"Well,"
said the monster with a sneer,
"well, enemy of man, there you boast your likeness to me."
The old man shuddered.
"Oh God, rather than hate mankind as you do, let me love them."
Guards came to remove the monster to a more secure cell. Schumacher was left alone in his dungeon to dream. But he was no longer the enemy of mankind. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 48. Keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from the violent men, who have purposed to thrust aside my step. The proud have hid a snare for me, and cords. They have spread a net by the wayside. They have set gins for me. Psalms 140, 4. The fatal hour had come. The sun showed but half his disk above the horizon. The guards were doubled throughout Munkholm Castle. Before each door paced fierce, silent sentinels. The noises of the town seemed louder and more confused than usual as they ascended to the dark towers of the fortress, itself a prey to strange excitement. The mournful sound of muffled drums was heard in every courtyard. Now and again cannon growled. The heavy bell in the dungeon tolled slowly, with sullen, measured strokes, and from every direction boats loaded with people hastened toward the fearful rock. A scaffold hung with black, around which an impatient mob swarmed in ever-increasing numbers, rose from the castle parade ground in the centre of a hollow square of troops. Upon the scaffold a man, clad in red serge, walked up and down, now leaning upon the axe in his hand, and now fingering a billet and block upon the funeral platform. Close at hand a stake was prepared, before which several pitch torches burned. Between the scaffold and the stake was planted a post, from which hung the inscription, Ordner Guldenlew, traitor. A black flag floated from the top of the Schleswig tower. At this moment Ordner appeared before the judges still assembled in the court-room. The bishop alone was absent. His office as counsel for the defense had ended. The son of the viceroy was dressed in black, and wore upon his neck the collar of the Dannebrog. His face was pale but proud. He was alone, for he had been led forth to torture before Chaplain Athanasius Munder returned to his cell. Ordner's sacrifice was already inwardly accomplished, and yet Ethel's husband still clung to life, and might perhaps have chosen another night than that of the tomb for his wedding night. He had prayed and dreamed many dreams in his dreary cell. Now he was beyond all prayers and all dreams. He was strong in the strength imparted by religion and by love. The crowd, more deeply moved than the prisoner, eagerly gazed at him. His illustrious rank, his horrible fate, awakened universal envy and pity. Every spectator watched his punishment, without comprehending his crime. In every human heart lurks a strange feeling which urges its owner to behold the tortures of others as well as their pleasures. Men seek with awful avidity to read destruction upon the distorted features of one who is about to die, as if some revelation from heaven or from hell must appear at that awful moment in the poor wretch's eyes, as if they would learn what sort of shadow is cast by the death angel's wing as he hovers over a human head, as if they would search and know what is left to a man when hope is gone. That being, full of health and strength, moving, breathing, living, and which in another instant must cease to move, breathe, and live, surrounded by beings like himself, whom he never harmed, all of whom pity him, and none of whom can help him, that wretched being, dying, though not dead, bending alike beneath an earthly power and an invisible might, this life which society could not give, but which it takes with all the pomp and ceremony of legal murder, profoundly stirred the popular imagination. Condemned as all of us are to death, with an indefinite reprieve, the unfortunate man who knows the exact hour when his reprieve expires is an object of strange and painful curiosity. The reader may remember that before he mounted the scaffold, Ordner was to be taken before the court, there to be stripped of his titles and honors. Hardly had the stir excited in the assembly by his arrival given place to quiet, when the president ordered the book of heraldry of both kingdoms and the statutes of the Order of the Dannebrog to be brought. Then directing the prisoner to kneel upon one knee, he commanded the spectators to pay respectful heed, opened the book of the Knights of the Dannebrog, and began to read in a loud, stern voice.
We, Christian, by the grace and mercy of Almighty God, King of Denmark and Norway, of Goths and Vandals, Duke of Schleswig, Holstein, Stormaria, and Dithmarsen, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst, do declare that having re-established at the suggestion of the Lord Chancellor, Count Griffenfeld,
The president passed over this name so rapidly that it was scarcely audible.
The Royal Order of the Dannebrog, founded by our illustrious ancestor Saint Valdemar, whereas we hold that inasmuch as the said venerable order was created in memory of the flag Dannebrog, sent down from heaven to our blessed kingdom, it would belie the divine origin of the order should any knight forfeit his honor, or break the holy laws of church and state with impunity. We therefore decree, kneeling before God, that whosoever of the knights of the order shall deliver his soul to the demon by any felony or treason, after a public reprimand from the court, shall be forever degraded from his rank as a knight of this our royal order of the Dannebrog.
The president closed the book.
Ordener Guldenlew, Baron Thorwig, Knight of the Dannebrog, you have been found guilty of high treason, for which crime your head shall be cut off, your body burned, and your ashes flung to the winds. Ordener Guldenlew, traitor, you have shown yourself unworthy to hold rank with the knights of the Dannebrog. I request you to humble yourself, for I am about to degrade you publicly in the name of the king.
The president stretched his hand over the book of the order and prepared to pronounce the fatal formula against Ordener, who remained calm and motionless, when a side door opened to the right of the bench. An officer of the church entered and announced his reverence the Bishop of Throndhjem. He entered hurriedly, accompanied by another ecclesiastic, on whose arm he leaned.
"Stop, Mr. President!"
he exclaimed with a strength of which a man of his age seemed hardly capable.
"Stop! Heaven be praised! I am in time."
The audience listened with renewed interest, foreseeing some fresh development. The president turned angrily to the bishop.
"Allow me to inform your reverence that your presence here is wholly unnecessary. The court is about to degrade from his rank the prisoner who will suffer the penalty of his crime directly."
"Forbear," said the bishop, "to lay hands on one who is pure in the sight of God. The prisoner is innocent." The cry of astonishment which burst from the spectators was only matched by the cry of terror uttered by the president and private secretary.
"Yes, tremble, judges,"
resumed the bishop, before the president could recover his usual presence of mind.
"Tremble, for you are about to shed innocent blood."
As the president's agitation died away, Ordener arose in consternation. The noble youth feared lest his generous ruse had been discovered and proofs of Schumacker's guilt had been found.
"Bishop," said the president, "in this affair crime seems to evade us, being transferred from one to another. Do not trust to any mere appearances. If Ordener Guldenlew be innocent, who then is guilty?"
"Your grace shall know," replied the bishop. Then, showing the court an iron casket, which a servant had brought in behind him, "Noble lords, you have judged in darkness. Within this casket is the miraculous light which shall dissipate that darkness." The president, private secretary, and Ordener all seemed amazed at the sight of the mysterious casket. The bishop added, "Noble judges, hear me. Today, as I return to my palace, to rest from the fatigues of the night, and to pray for the prisoners, I received this sealed iron box. The keeper of the Spladgest, I was told, brought it to the palace this morning to be given to me, declaring that it undoubtedly contained some satanic charm, as he had found it on the body of the sacrilegious Benignus Biagodry, which had just been fished out of Lake Sparbo." Ordener listened more eagerly than ever. All the spectators were as still as death. The president and private secretary hung their heads guiltily. They seemed to have lost all their cunning and audacity. There is a moment in the life of every sinner when his power vanishes. "After blessing this casket," continued the bishop, "we broke the seal, which, as you can still see, bears the ancient and now extinct arms of Griffenfeld. We did indeed find a devilish secret within. You shall judge for yourselves, venerable sirs. Lend me your most earnest attention, for human blood is at stake, and the Lord will hold you accountable for every drop that you may shed." Then opening the terrible casket, he drew forth a slip of parchment, upon which was written the following testimony.
I, Blackstone Cambisulsum, doctor, being about to die, do declare that of my own free will and pleasure I have placed in the hands of Captain Dispolsen, the agent at Copenhagen of the former Count Griffenfeld, the enclosed document, drawn up wholly by the hand of Turiaf Musdemon, servant of the Chancellor, Count d'Ahlefeld, to the end that the said captain may make such use of it as shall seem to him best. And I pray God to pardon my crimes. Given under my hand and seal at Copenhagen, this 11th day of January, 1699. Cambisulsum. The private secretary shook like a leaf. He tried to speak, but could not. The bishop handed the parchment to the pale and agitated president.
"What do I see?"
exclaimed the latter as he unfolded the parchment.
"A note to the noble Count d'Ahlefeld, upon the means of legally ridding himself of Schumacher. I swear, reverend bishop."
The paper dropped from his trembling fingers. Read it, sir," said the bishop. "I doubt not that your unworthy servant has abused your name as he has that of the unfortunate Schumacher. Only see the result of your uncharitable aversion to your fallen predecessor. One of your followers has plotted his ruin in your name, doubtless hoping to make a merit of it to your grace." These words revived the president, as showing him that the suspicions of the bishop, who was acquainted with the entire contents of the casket, had not fallen upon him. Ordener also breathed more freely. He began to see that the innocence of Ethel's father might be made manifest at the same time with his own. He felt a deep surprise at the singular fate which had led him to pursue a fearful brigand to recover this casket, which his old guide Benignus Biagodry bore about him all the time; that it was actually following him while he was seeking for it. He also reflected on the solemn lesson of the events which, after ruining him by means of this same fatal casket, now proved the instrument of his salvation. The president, recovering himself, read with much show of indignation, in which the entire audience shared, a lengthy memorandum in which Musdemon set forth all the details of the abominable scheme which we have seen him execute in the course of this story. Several times the private secretary attempted to rise and defend himself, but each time he was frowned down. At last the odious reading came to an end amid a murmur of universal horror.
"Halberdiers, seize that man,"
said the president, pointing to the private secretary. The wretch, speechless and almost lifeless, stepped from his place and was cast into the criminal dock, followed by the hoots of the populace. "Judges," said the bishop, "shudder and rejoice. The truth, which has just been brought home to your consciences, will now be even more strongly confirmed by the testimony of our honored brother Athanasius Munder, chaplain to the prisons of this royal town." It was indeed Athanasius Munder who accompanied the bishop. He bowed to his superior in the church and to the court, then, at a sign from the president, proceeded as follows. "What I am about to state is the truth. May heaven punish me if I utter a word with any other object than to do my duty. From what I saw this morning in the cell of the viceroy's son, I was led to think that the young man was not guilty, although your lordships had condemned him upon his own confession. Now I was called, a few hours since, to give the last spiritual consolations to the unfortunate mountaineer so cruelly murdered before your very eyes, and whom you condemned, worthy sirs, as being Hans of Iceland. The dying man said to me, 'I am not Hans of Iceland. I am justly punished for having assumed his name. I was paid to play the part by the chancellor's private secretary. He is called Musdemon, and it was he who managed the whole revolt under the name of Hacket. I believe him to be the only guilty man in this whole matter.' Then he asked me to give him my blessing, and advised me to make haste and repeat his last words to the court. God is my witness. May I save the shedding of innocent blood, and not cause that of the guilty to flow." He ceased, again bowing to his bishop and the judges. "Your grace sees," said the bishop to the president, "that one of my clients was not mistaken when he found so much resemblance between Hacket and your private secretary."
"Turiaf Musdemon,"
said the president to the prisoner. What have you to say in your defense? Musdcemon looked at his master with an expression which alarmed him. He had recovered his usual impudence, and after a brief pause answered, Nothing, sir. The president resumed in a weak and faltering voice. Then you acknowledge yourself guilty of the crime with which you are charged. You confess yourself to be the author of a conspiracy alike against the state and against one John Schumacher. I do, my lord, replied Musdcemon. The bishop rose. Mr. President, that there may be no shadow of doubt in this affair, will your grace ask the prisoner if he had any accomplices? Accomplices? Repeated Musdcemon. He hesitated a moment. The president wore a look of awful anxiety. No, my lord bishop, he said at last. The president's look of relief fell full upon him. No, I had no accomplices, repeated Musdcemon, still more emphatically. I concocted this plot through affection for my master, who knew nothing of it, to destroy his enemy, Schumacher. The eyes of prisoner and president met once more. Your grace, said the bishop, must see that as Musdcemon had no accomplices, Baron Ordener Guldenlew must be innocent. Then why, worthy bishop, did he confess his guilt? Mr. President, why did that mountaineer persist that he was Hans of Iceland, at the risk of his life? God alone knows our secret motives. Ordener took up the word. Judges, I can tell you my motive, now that the real criminal has been discovered. I accused myself falsely to save the former chancellor, Schumacher, whose death would have left his daughter without a protector. The president bit his lip. We request the court, said the bishop, to proclaim the innocence of our client Ordener Guldenlew. The president responded with a nod, and at the request of the lord mayor they finished their examination of the terrible casket, which contained nothing more except Schumacher's titles of nobility and a few letters from the Munkholm prisoner to Captain Dispolsen, bitter but not criminal letters, which alarmed no one but Chancellor d'Ahlefeld. The court then withdrew, and after a brief deliberation, while the curious crowd, gathered on the parade, waited with stubborn impatience to see the viceroy's son led forth to die, and the executioner nonchalantly paced the scaffold, the president pronounced in a scarcely audible voice the death sentence of Turiaf Musdcemon, the acquittal of Ordener Guldenlew, and the restoration of all his honors, titles, and privileges. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 49. What will you sell me your carcass for, my boy? I would not give you, in faith, a broken toy. St. Michael and Satan. Old Miracle Play. The remnant of the regiment of Munkholm musketeers had returned to their old quarters in the barracks, which stood in the centre of a vast square courtyard within the fortress. At nightfall the doors of this building were barricaded, all the soldiers withdrawing into it, with the exception of the sentinels upon the various towers, and the handful of men on guard before the military prison adjoining the barracks. This, being the safest and best watched place of confinement in Munkholm, contained the two prisoners sentenced to be hanged on the following morning, Hans of Iceland and Musdcemon. Hans of Iceland was alone in his cell. He was stretched upon the floor, chained, his head upon a stone. A feeble light filtered through a square grated opening, cut in the heavy oak door which divided his cell from the next room, where he heard his jailers laugh and swear, and heard the sound of the bottles which they drained, and the dice which they threw upon a drumhead. The monster silently writhed in the darkness, his limbs twitched convulsively, and he gnashed his teeth. All at once he lifted his voice and called aloud. A turnkey appeared at the grating. "What do you want?" said he. Hans of Iceland rose.
Mate, I am cold. My stone bed is hard and damp. Give me a bundle of straw to sleep on, and a little fire to warm myself.
"It is only fair," replied the turnkey. To give a little comfort to a poor devil who is going to be hung, even if he be the Iceland devil. I will bring you what you want. Have you any money?
No,
replied the brigand. What? You, the most famous robber in Norway, and you have not a few scurvy gold ducats in your pouch?
No,
repeated the brigand. A few little crowns?
I tell you, no.
Not even a few paltry escalins?
No, nothing. Not enough to buy a rat's skin or a man's soul.
The turnkey shook his head. Oh, that's a different matter. You have no right to complain. Your cell is not so cold as the one you will have to sleep in tomorrow, and yet I'll be bound you won't notice the hardness of that bed. So saying, the jailer withdrew, followed by the curses of the monster, who continued to rattle his chains, which gave forth a hollow clang, as if they were breaking slowly under repeated and violent jerks and pulls. The door opened. A tall man, dressed in red serge, carrying a dark lantern, entered the cell, accompanied by the jailer who had refused the prisoner's request. The latter at once became perfectly quiet. "Hans of Iceland?" said the man in red. "I am Nicol Origix, executioner of the province of Trondheim. Tomorrow, at sunrise, I am to have the honor of hanging your excellency upon a fine new gallows in Trondheim market-place."
Are you very sure that you will hang me?
replied the brigand. The executioner laughed. "I wish you were as sure to rise straight into heaven by Jacob's ladder as you are to mount the scaffold by Nicol Origix's ladder."
Indeed,
said the monster with a malicious grin. "I tell you again, Sir Brigand, that I am hangman for the province."
if I were not myself, I should like to be you,
replied the brigand. "I can say the same for you," rejoined the hangman. Then, rubbing his hands with a conceited and complacent smirk, he added, "My friend, you are right. Ours is a fine trade. Ah, my hand knows the weight of a man's head."
Have you often tasted blood?
asked the brigand. No, but I have often used the rack."
Have you ever devoured the entrails of a living child?
"No, but I have crushed men's bones in a vice. I have broken their limbs upon the wheel. I have dulled steel saws upon their skulls. I have torn their quivering flesh with red-hot pincers. I have burned the blood in their open veins by pouring in a stream of molten lead and boiling oil."
Yes,
said the brigand with a thoughtful look.
You have your pleasures too.
"In fact," added the hangman, "Hans of Iceland though you be, I imagine that my hands have released more human souls than yours, to say nothing of your own, which you must render up tomorrow."
Always provided that I have one. Do you suppose, then, executioner of Trondheim, that you can release the spirit of Ingolf from Hans of Iceland's mortal frame without its carrying off your own?
The executioner laughed heartily. "Indeed, we shall see tomorrow."
We shall see,
said the brigand. "Well," said the executioner, "I did not come here to talk of your spirit, but only of your body. Hearken, your body by law belongs to me after your death, but the law gives you the right to sell it to me. Tell me what you will take for it."
What I will take for my corpse,
said the brigand. "Yes, and be reasonable." Hans of Iceland turned to his jailer.
Tell me, mate, how much do you ask for a bundle of straw and a handful of fire?"
The jailer reflected. 2 gold ducats."
Well,
said the brigand to the hangman,
you must give me 2 gold ducats for my corpse.
2 gold ducats?" cried the hangman. "It is horribly dear. 2 gold ducats for a wretched corpse? No, indeed, I'll give no such price.
Then
Quietly responded the monster.
you shall not have it.
Then you will be thrown into the common sewer instead of adorning the Royal Museum at Copenhagen or the collection of curiosities at Bergen.
What do I care?
Long after your death, people will flock to look at your skeleton, saying, "Those are the remains of the famous Hans of Iceland." Your bones will be nicely polished and strung on copper wire. You will be placed in a big glass case and dusted carefully every day. Instead of these honors, consider what awaits you if you refuse to sell me your body. You will be left to rot in some charnel house, where you will be the prey of worms and other vermin.
Well, I shall be like the living, who are perpetually preyed upon by their inferiors and devoured by their superiors.
2 gold ducats, muttered the hangman. What an exorbitant price! If you will not come down in your terms, my dear fellow, we can never make a trade.
It is my first and probably my last trade. I am bent on having it a good one.
Consider that I may make you repent of your obstinacy. Tomorrow you will be in my power.
Do you think so?
These words were uttered with a look which escaped the hangman. Yes, and there is a certain way of tightening a slip knot, but if you will only be reasonable, I will hang you in my best manner.
Little do I care what you do to my neck tomorrow,
replied the monster with a mocking air. Come, won't you be satisfied with 2 crowns? What can you do with the money?
Ask your comrade there,
said the brigand, pointing to the turnkey.
He charges me 2 gold ducats for a handful of straw and a fire.
Now by St. Joseph's saw, said the hangman, angrily addressing the turnkey, it is shocking to make a man pay its weight in gold for a fire and a little worthless straw. 2 ducats, the turnkey replied sourly. I have a good mind to make him pay 4. It is you, Master Nicol, who act like a regular screw in refusing to give this poor prisoner 2 gold ducats for his corpse, when you can sell it for at least 20 to some learned old fogey, or some doctor. I never paid more than 20 escalins for a corpse in my life, said the hangman. Yes, replied the jailer, for the body of some paltry thief, or some miserable Jew, that may be. But everybody knows that you can get whatever you choose to ask for Hans of Iceland's body. Hans of Iceland shook his head. What business is it of yours? Said Orugix curtly. Do I interfere with your plunder? With the clothes and jewels that you steal from the prisoners, and the dirty water which you pour into their thin soup, and the torture to which you put them to extort money from them? No, I never will give you 2 gold ducats. No straw and no fire for less than 2 gold ducats, replied the obstinate jailer.
No corpse for less than 2 gold ducats,
repeated the unmoved brigand. The hangman, after a brief pause, stamped his foot angrily, saying, Well, I have no time to waste with you. I am wanted elsewhere. He drew from his waistcoat a leather bag, which he opened slowly and reluctantly. There, cursed demon of Iceland, there are your 2 ducats. Satan would never give you as much for your soul as I do for your body, I am sure. The brigand accepted the gold. The turnkey instantly held out his hand to take it.
1 instant, maid. First, give me what I asked for.
The jailer went out and soon returned with a bundle of dry straw and a pan of live coals, which he placed beside the prisoner.
That's it,
said the brigand, giving him the 2 ducats.
I'll make a warm night of it. 1 word more, he added in an ominous tone. Does not this prisoner join the barracks of the Munkholm musketeers?
It does, said the jailer.
And which way is the wind?
From the east, I think.
Good,
said the brigand. What are you aiming at, comrade? Asked the jailer.
Nothing,
replied the brigand.
Farewell, comrade. Until tomorrow morning, early.
Yes, tomorrow,
repeated the brigand. And the noise of the heavy door, as it closed, prevented the jailer and his companion from hearing the fierce, jeering laughter which accompanied these words. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 50. Do you hope to end with another crime? Alex Sume. Let us now take a look at the other cell in the military prison adjoining the barracks, which holds our old acquaintance Turiaf Musdemon. It may seem surprising that Musdemon, crafty and cowardly as he was, should so readily confess his crime to the court which condemned him, and so generously conceal the share of his ungrateful master, Chancellor d'Ahlefeld, in it. However, Musdemon had not experienced a change of heart. His noble frankness was perhaps the greatest proof of cunning which he could possibly have given. When he saw his infernal intrigue so unexpectedly exposed, beyond all hope of denial, he was for an instant stunned and terrified. Conquering his alarm, his extreme shrewdness soon showed him that as it was impossible to destroy his chosen victims, he must bend all his energies to saving himself. Two plans at once presented themselves. The first, to throw all the blame upon Count d'Ahlefeld, who had so basely deserted him. The second, to assume the whole burden of the crime himself. A vulgar mind would have grasped at the former. Musdemon chose the latter. The Chancellor was Chancellor, after all. Besides, there was nothing in the papers which directly implicated him, although they contained overwhelming evidence against his secretary. Then his master had given him several meaning looks. This was enough to confirm him in his purpose to suffer himself to be condemned, confident that Count d'Ahlefeld would connive at his escape, though less from gratitude for past service than through his need for future aid. He therefore paced his prison, which was dimly lighted by a wretched lamp, never doubting that the door would be thrown open during the night. He studied the architecture of the old stone cell, built by kings whose very names have almost vanished from the pages of history, and was much surprised to find a wooden plank which echoed back his tread as if it covered some subterranean vault. He also observed a huge iron ring cemented into the arched roof, from which hung a fragment of rope. Time passed, and he listened impatiently to the clock on the tower as it slowly struck the hours, its mournful toll resounding through the silence of the night. At last there was a footfall outside his cell. His heart beat high with hope. The massive bolt creaked, the padlock dropped, and as the door opened, his face beamed with delight. It was the same character in scarlet robes whom we have just encountered in Hans of Iceland's prison. He had a coil of hempen cord under his arm, and was accompanied by 4 halberdiers in black, armed with swords and partisans. Musdemon still wore the wig and gown of a magistrate. His dress seemed to impress the man in red, who bowed low as if accustomed to respect that garb, and said with some hesitation, "Sir, is our business with your worship?" "Yes, yes," hastily replied Musdemon, confirmed in his hope of escape by this polite address, and failing to observe the bloody hue of the speaker's garments. "Your name," said the man, his eyes fixed on a parchment which he had just unrolled, "is Turiaf Musdemon, I believe?" "Just so. Do you come from the Chancellor, my friend?" "Yes, your worship." "Do not fail, when you have done your errand, to assure his grace of my undying gratitude." The man in red looked at him in amazement. "Your gratitude?" "Yes, to be sure, my friend, for it will probably be out of my power to thank him in person very soon." "Probably," dryly replied the man. "And you must feel," added Musdemon, "that I owe him a deep debt of gratitude for such a service." "By the cross of the repentant thief," cried the man with a coarse laugh. "To hear you, one would think that the Chancellor was doing something quite unusual for you." "Well, to be sure, it is no more than strict justice." "Strict justice, that is the word. But you acknowledge that it is justice. It is the first admission of the kind that I ever heard in the 26 years that I have followed my profession. Come, sir, We waste our time in idle talk. Are you ready? I am, said the delighted Musdemon, stepping to the door. Wait a minute, exclaimed the man in red, stooping to lay his coil of rope on the floor. Musdemon paused. What are you going to do with all that rope? Your worship may well ask. I know that there is much more than I shall need, but when I began on this affair, I thought there would be a great many more prisoners. Come, make haste, said Musdemon. Your worship is in a wonderful hurry. Have you no last favor to ask? None but the one I have already mentioned, that you will thank his grace for me. For God's sake, make haste, added Musdemon. I long to get away from here. Have we a long journey before us? A long journey, replied the man in red, straightening himself and measuring off a few lengths of rope. The journey will not tire your worship much, for we can make it without leaving this room. Musdemon shuddered. What do you mean? What do you mean yourself? Asked the man. Oh God, said Musdemon, turning pale. Who are you? I am the hangman. The poor wretch trembled like a dry leaf blown by the wind. Did you not come to help me to escape? He feebly muttered. The hangman laughed. Yes, truly, to help you to escape into the spirit land, whence I warrant you will not be brought back. Musdemon grovelled on the floor. Mercy! Have pity on me! Mercy! In faith, coldly observed the hangman, 'tis the first time I was ever asked such a thing. Do you take me for the king? The unfortunate man dragged himself on his knees, trailing his gown in the dust, beating his head against the floor, and clasping the hangman's feet with muffled groans and broken sobs. Come, be quiet, said the hangman. I never before saw a black gown kneel to a red jerkin. He kicked the suppliant aside, adding, Pray to God and the saints, fellow. They will be more apt to hear you than I. Musdemon still knelt, his face buried in his hands, weeping bitterly. Meantime the hangman, standing on tiptoe, passed his rope through the ring in the ceiling. He let it hang until it reached the floor, then secured it by a double turn, and made a slip knot in the end. I am ready, said he when these ominous preparations were over. Are you ready to lay down your life? No, said Musdemon, springing up. No, it cannot be. There is some horrible mistake. Chancellor d'Ahlefeld is not so base. I am too necessary to him. It is impossible that it was for me he sent you. Let me escape. Do not fear that the Chancellor will be angry. Did you not say, replied the executioner, that you were Turiaf Musdemon? The prisoner hesitated for an instant, then said suddenly, No, no, my name is not Musdemon. My name is Turiaf Orugix. Orugix? Cried the executioner. Orugix? He snatched off the periwig which concealed the prisoner's face, and uttered an exclamation of surprise. My brother! Your brother, replied the prisoner with a mixture of shame and pleasure. Can you be? Nicol Orugix, hangman for the province of Trondheim. At your service, brother Turiaf. The prisoner fell upon the executioner's neck, calling him his brother, his beloved brother. This fraternal recognition would not have gratified any one who witnessed it. Turiaf lavished countless caresses upon Nicol with a forced and timid smile, while Nicol responded with a gloomy and embarrassed look. It was like a tiger fondling an elephant, while the monster's ponderous foot is already planted upon its panting chest. What happiness, brother Nicol! I am glad indeed to see you. And I am sorry for you, brother Turiaf. The prisoner pretended not to hear these words, and went on in trembling tones. You have a wife and children, I suppose. You must take me to see my gentle sister, and let me kiss my dear nephews. The devil fly away with you, muttered the hangman. I will be a second father to them. Hark ye, brother. I am powerful. I have great influence. The brother replied with a sinister expression. I know that you had. At present you had better be thinking of that which you have doubtless contrived to curry with the saints. All hope faded from the prisoner's face. Good God! What does this mean, dear Nicol? I am safe since I have found you. Think that the same mother bore us, that we played together as children. Remember, Nicol, you are my brother. You never remembered it until now, replied the brutal Nicol. No, I cannot die by my brother's hand. It is your own fault, Turiaf. It was you who ruined my career, who prevented me from becoming royal executioner at Copenhagen, who caused me to be sent into this miserable region as a petty provincial hangman. If you had not been a bad brother, you would have no cause to complain of that which distresses you so much now. I should not be in Trondheim, and someone else would have to finish your business. Now enough, brother. You must die. Death is hideous to the wicked for the same reason that it is beautiful to the good. Both must put off their humanity, but the just man is delivered from his body as from a prison, while the wicked man is torn from it as from a jail. At the last moment hell yawns before the sinful soul which has dreamed of annihilation. It knocks anxiously at the dark portals of death, and it is not annihilation that answers. The prisoner rolled upon the floor and wrung his hands, with moans more heartrending than the everlasting wail of the damned. Oh God, have mercy! Holy angels in heaven, if you exist, have pity upon me! Nicol, brother Nicol, in our mother's name, oh, let me live! The hangman held out his warrant. I cannot. The order is peremptory. That warrant is not for me, stammered the despairing prisoner. It is for one Musdemon. That is not I. I am Turiaf Orugix. You jest, said Nicol, shrugging his shoulders. I know perfectly well that it is meant for you. Besides, he added roughly, yesterday you would not have been Turiaf Orugix to your brother. Today he can only look upon you as Turiaf Musdemon. Oh, brother, groaned the wretch. Only wait until tomorrow. It is impossible that the Chancellor could have given the order for my death. It is some frightful mistake. Count d'Ahlefeld loves me dearly. Dear Nicol, I implore you, spare my life. I shall soon be restored to favor, and I will do whatever you may ask. You can do me but one service, Turiaf, broke in the hangman. I have lost 2 executions already, upon which I counted the most, those of ex-Chancellor Schumacher and the Viceroy's son. I am always unlucky. You and Hans of Iceland are all that are left. Your execution, being secret and by night, is worth at least 12 gold ducats to me. Let me hang you peaceably. That is the only favor I ask of you. Oh, God, sighed the prisoner. It will be the first and the last, in good sooth. But in return, I promise that you shall not suffer. I will hang you like a brother. Submit to your fate. Musdemon sprang to his feet. His nostrils were distended with rage, his livid lips quivered, his teeth chattered, his mouth foamed with despair. Ah, Satan! I saved that d'Ahlefeld. I have embraced my brother, and they murder me. And I must die this very night in a dark dungeon, where none can hear my curses, where I may not cry out against them from one end of the kingdom to the other, where I may not tear asunder the veil that hides their crimes. Was it for such a death that I have stained my entire life? Wretch, he added, turning to his brother, would you become a fratricide? I am the executioner, answered the phlegmatic Nicol. No, exclaimed the prisoner, and he flung himself headlong upon the executioner, his eyes darting flame and streaming with tears, like those of a bull at bay. No, I will not die thus meekly. I have not lived like a poisonous serpent to die like a paltry worm trampled under foot. I will leave my life in my last sting, but it shall be mortal. So saying, he grappled like a bitter foe with him whom he had just embraced as a brother. The fulsome, flattering Musdemon now showed his true spirit. Despair stirred up the foul dregs of his soul, and after crawling prostrate like a tiger he sprang upon his enemy. It would have been hard to decide which of the 2 brothers was the most appalling as they struggled, one with the brute ferocity of a wild beast, the other with the artful fury of a demon. But the four halberdiers, hitherto passive spectators, did not remain motionless. They lent their aid to the executioner, and soon Musdcemon, whose rage was his only strength, was forced to quit his hold. He dashed himself against the wall, uttering inarticulate yells, and blunting his nails upon the stone. To die! Devils in hell, to die! My shrieks unheard outside this roof, my arms powerless to tear down these walls. He was seized, but offered no resistance. His useless efforts had exhausted him. He was stripped of his gown and bound. At this moment a sealed packet fell from his bosom. " What is that ?" said the hangman. An infernal light gleamed in the prisoner's haggard eyes. He muttered, " How could I forget that? Look here, brother Nicol," he added in an almost friendly tone. " These papers belong to the Lord Chancellor. Promise to give them to him, and you may do what you will with me." " Since you are quiet now, I promise to grant your last wish, although you have been a bad brother to me. I will see that the chancellor has the papers, on the honor of an Orugix." " Ask leave to hand them to him yourself," replied the prisoner, smiling at the executioner, who from his nature had little understanding of smiles. " The pleasure which they will afford his Grace may lead him to confer some favor on you." " Oh, really, brother ?" said Orugix. " Thank you. Perhaps he will make me executioner royal after all, eh ? Well, let us part good friends. I forgive you all the scratches which you gave me. Forgive me for the hempen collar which I must give you." " The chancellor promised me a very different sort of collar," said Musdcemon. Then the halberdiers led him, bound, into the middle of the cell. The hangman placed the fatal noose round his neck. " Are you ready, Turiaf ?"" One moment, one moment," said the prisoner, whose terror had revived. " For mercy's sake, brother, do not pull the rope until I tell you to do so." " I do not need to pull it," answered the hangman. A moment later he repeated his question. " Are you ready ?"" One moment more. Alas, must I die ?"" Turiaf, I have no time to waste." So saying, Orugix signed to the halberdiers to stand away from the prisoner. " One word more, brother. Do not forget to give the packet to Count d'Ahlefeld." " Never fear," replied Nychol. He added for the third time, " Come, are you ready ?" The unfortunate man opened his lips, perhaps to plead for another brief delay, when the impatient hangman stooped and turned a brass button projecting from the floor. The plank gave way beneath the victim. The poor wretch disappeared through a square trapdoor, with a dull twang from the rope, which was stretched suddenly and vibrated fearfully with the dying man's final convulsions. Nothing was seen but the rope swinging to and fro in the dark opening, through which came a cool breeze and a sound as of running water. The halberdiers themselves shrank back, horror stricken. The hangman approached the abyss, seized the rope which still vibrated, and swung himself into the hole, pressing both feet against his victim's shoulders. The fatal rope stretched to its utmost with a creak, and stood still. A stifled sob rose from the trap. " All is over," said the hangman, climbing back into the cell. " Farewell, brother." He drew a cutlass from his belt. " Go feed the fishes in the fjord. Your body to the waves, your soul to the flames." With these words he cut the taut rope. The fragment still fastened to the iron ring lashed the ceiling, while the deep, dark water splashed high as the body fell, then swept on their underground course. The hangman closed the trap as he had opened it. As he rose, he saw that the room was full of smoke. " What is all this ?" he asked the halberdiers. " Where does this smoke come from ?" They knew no better than he. In surprise they opened the door. The corridors were also filled with thick and nauseating smoke. A secret outlet led them, greatly terrified, to the square courtyard, where a fearful sight met their gaze. A vast conflagration, fanned by a violent east wind, was consuming the military prison and the barracks. The flames, driven in eddying whirls, climbed stone walls, crowned burning roofs, leaped from gaping window frames ; and the black towers of Munkholm now shone in a red and ominous light,
now vanished in a dense cloud of smoke. A turnkey, who was escaping by the courtyard, told them hastily that the fire had broken out in the monster cell during the sleep of Hans of Iceland's keepers, he having been imprudently allowed to have a fire and straw. "How unlucky I am!" cried Orugix when he heard this story. "Now I suppose Hans of Iceland has slipped through my hands too. The rascal must have been burned. And I shan't even get his body, for which I paid 2 ducats. Meantime, the unfortunate Munkholm musketeers, roused suddenly from their sleep by imminent death, crowded toward the door, only to find it closely barred. Their shrieks of anguish and despair were heard outside. They stood at the blazing windows, wringing their hands, or dashed themselves madly upon the flagging of the court, escaping one death to meet another. The victorious flames devoured the entire structure before the rest of the garrison could come to the rescue. All help was vain. Luckily the building stood by itself. The door was broken in with hatchets, but it was too late, for as it opened the burning roof and floors gave way and fell upon the unfortunate man with a loud crash. The entire building disappeared in a whirlwind of fiery dust and burning smoke, which stifled the faint moans of the expiring man. Next morning, nothing was left in the courtyard but 4 high walls, black and smoking, around a horrid mass of smouldering ruins, still devouring each other like wild beasts in a circus. When the pile had cooled, it was searched. Beneath a heap of stones and iron beams, twisted out of shape by the flames, was found a mass of whitened bones and disfigured corpses. With some 30 soldiers, most of whom were crippled, this was all that remained of the crack regiment of Munkholm. When the site of the prison was searched, and they reached the fatal cell where the fire had broken out, and where Hans of Iceland had been imprisoned, they found the remains of a human body, close beside an iron pen and a heap of broken chains. It was curious that among these ashes there were 2 skulls, although there was but 1 skeleton. End of chapter 50. Chapter 51 of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Chapter 51. Saladin. Bravo, Ibrahim! You are indeed the messenger of good fortune. I thank you for your joyful tidings. The Mameluke. Well, is that all? Saladin. What did you expect? The Mameluke. Nothing more for the messenger of good fortune. Lessing, Nathan the Wise. Pale and worn, Count d'Ahlefeld strode up and down his apartment. In his hand he crushed a bundle of letters which he had just read, while he stamped his foot on the smooth marble floor and the gold-fringed rugs. At the other end of the room, in an attitude of deep respect, stood Nicol Orugix, in his infamous scarlet dress, felt hat in hand.
You have done me good service, Musdemon,
hissed the Chancellor. The hangman looked up timidly.
Is your Grace pleased?
What do you want here?
Said the Chancellor, turning upon him suddenly. The hangman, proud that he had won a glance from the Chancellor, smiled hopefully. What do I want, your Grace? The post of executioner at Copenhagen, if your Grace will deign to bestow so great a favor on me in return for the good news I have brought you. The Chancellor called to the 2 halberdiers on guard at his door.
Seize this rascal. He annoys me by his impudence.
The guards led away the amazed and confounded Nicol, who ventured one more word.
My lord! You are no longer hangman for the province of Trondheim. I deprive you of your office,
cried the Chancellor, slamming the door. The Chancellor returned to his letters, angrily read and re-read them, maddened by his dishonor. For these were the letters which once passed between the Countess and Musdemon. This was Elphega's handwriting. He found that Ulrica was not his daughter, that, it might be, the Frederick whom he mourned was not his son. The unhappy Count was punished through that same pride which had caused all his crimes. He cared not now if vengeance evaded him. All his ambitious dreams vanished. His past was blasted, his future dead. He had striven to destroy his enemies. He had only succeeded in losing his own reputation, his adviser, and even his marital and paternal rights. But he must see once more the wretched woman who had betrayed him. He hastily crossed the spacious apartment, shaking the letters in his hand as if they were a thunderbolt. He threw open the door of Elphega's room. He entered. The guilty wife had just unexpectedly learned from Colonel Vautoun of her son Frederick's fearful death. The poor mother was insane. End of chapter 51. Conclusion of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo, translated by Abby Langdon Alger. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sonia. Conclusion. What I said in jest, you took seriously. Old Spanish Romance, King Alfonso to Bernard. For a fortnight the events which we have just related formed the sole topic of conversation in the town and province of Trondhjem, judged from the various standpoints of the various speakers. The people of the town, who had waited in vain to see 7 successive executions, began to despair of ever having that pleasure, and purblind old women declared that, on the night of the lamentable fire at the barracks, they had seen Hans of Iceland fly up in the flames, laughing amid the blaze, as he dashed the burning roof of the building upon the Munkholm musketeers. When, after an absence which to his Ethel seemed an age, Ordener returned to the Lion of Schleswig tower, accompanied by General Levin de Knud and Chaplain Athanasius Munder. Schumacher was walking in the garden, leaning on his daughter. The young couple found it hard not to rush into each other's arms, but they were forced to be content with a look. Schumacher affectionately grasped Ordener's hand and greeted the 2 strangers in a friendly manner. "Young man," said the aged captive, "may heaven bless your return." "Sir," replied Ordener, "I have just arrived. Having seen my father at Bergen, I would now embrace my father at Munkholm." "What do you mean?" asked the old man in great surprise. "That you must give me your daughter, noble sir." "My daughter!" exclaimed the prisoner, turning to the confused and blushing Ethel. "Yes, my lord, I love your Ethel. I have devoted my life to her. She is mine." Schumacher's face clouded. "You are a brave and noble youth, my son. Although your father has done me much harm, I forgive him for your sake, and I should be glad to sanction this marriage. But there is an obstacle." "What is it, sir?" asked Ordener anxiously. "You love my daughter, but are you sure that she loves you?" The 2 lovers cast at each other a rapid glance of mute amazement. "Yes," continued the father, "I am sorry, for I love you, and would gladly call you son. But my daughter would never consent. She has recently confessed her aversion for you, and since your departure she is silent whenever I speak of you, and seems to avoid all thought of you, as if you were odious to her. You must give up your love for her, Ordener. Never fear, love may be cured as well as hatred." "My lord!" exclaimed the astonished Ordener.
"Father!"
cried Ethel, clasping her hands.
"Do not be alarmed, my daughter," interrupted the old man. "I approve of this marriage, but you do not. I will never force your inclinations, Ethel. This last fortnight has wrought a great change in me. You are free to choose for yourself."
Athanasius Munder smiled.
"She is not," he said.
"You are mistaken, dear father,"
added Ethel, taking courage.
"I do not hate Ordener."
"What?"
cried her father.
"I am,"
resumed Ethel. She hesitated. Ordener knelt at the old man's feet.
"She is my wife, father. Forgive me as my other father has forgiven me, and bless your children."
Schumacher, surprised in his turn, blessed the young couple.
"I have cursed so many people in my lifetime," said he, "that I now seize every opportunity for blessing. But explain."
All was made clear to him. He wept with emotion, gratitude, and love.
"I thought myself wise. I am old, and I did not understand the heart of a young girl."
"And so I am Mrs. Ordener Guldenlew,"
said Ethel, with childlike delight.
"Ordener Guldenlew,"
rejoined old Schumacher,
"you are a better man than I, for in the day of my prosperity I would never have stooped to wed the penniless and disgraced daughter of an unfortunate prisoner."
The general took the old man's hand, and offered him a roll of parchment, saying,
"Do not speak thus, Count. Here are your titles, which the king long since sent you by Dispolsen. His Majesty now adds a free pardon. Such is the dowry of your daughter, Countess Danneskjold."
"Pardon! Freedom!" repeated the enraptured Ethel.
"Countess Danneskjold," added her father. "Yes, Count," continued the general, "your honors and estates are restored."
"To whom do I owe all this?"
asked the happy Schumacker. "To General Levin de Knud," answered Ordener. "Levin de Knud! Did I not tell you, governor, that Levin de Knud was the best of men? But why did he not bring me the good news himself? Where is he?" Ordener pointed in surprise to the smiling, weeping general. "Here." The recognition of the two who had been comrades in the days of their youth and power was a touching one. Schumacker's heart swelled. His acquaintance with Hans had destroyed his hatred of men. His acquaintance with Ordener and Levin taught him to love them. The gloomy wedding in the cell was soon celebrated by brilliant festivities. Life smiled upon the young couple who had smiled at death. Count d'Ahlefeld saw that they were happy. This was his most cruel punishment. Athanasius Munder shared their joy. He obtained the pardon of his 12 convicts, and Ordener added that of his former companions in misfortune, Cannibal, Jonas, and Norbith, who returned, free and happy, to inform the appeased miners that the king released them from the protectorate. Schumacker did not long enjoy the union of Ethel and Ordener. Liberty and happiness were too much for him. He went to enjoy a different happiness and a different freedom. He died that same year, 1699, his children accepting this blow as a warning that there is no perfect bliss in this world. He was buried in Veer Church, upon an estate in Jutland, belonging to his son-in-law, and his tomb preserves all the titles of which captivity deprived him. From the marriage of Ordener and Ethel sprang the race of the Counts of Danneskjold. End of conclusion. End of Hans of Iceland by Victor Hugo. Translated by Abby Langdon Alger. Recording by Sonia. Thank you for listening.